Hey, good morning, everybody. This morning, we've got CEO of Atheist Republic with us, Jim Majors. You guys know who he is because he's done a lot with the debating circuit. He's been going around just annihilating a lot of his opponents on various topics, and I mean, like obliterating them. I've seen a lot of good debaters. Don't get me wrong, but I have not seen the amount of sheer just destroying that's been done by you on your opponents here, Jim. So I'm really impressed by that. So I wanted to bring you on and kind of talk about something we've been discussing a little bit about the atheism and the dangers of tribalism and groupthink. And I want people to come and join us. And if you don't mind, maybe call in and ask questions, because a lot of this stem from some of the videos that I've had recently and some of the comments that both you and I have looked at and just went, holy good grief. It's depressing. It really is depressing at what I'm seeing in some parts of the atheist community, not all of it, because obviously we have a lot of really good atheists and skeptics and people that are promoting very good narratives and good arguments. And so I kind of want to foster that while hopefully putting into the light the ones that are not so good. So everybody in the live chat, hi, come on in if you want to. Sharon wants you to rap for us real quick before we really got to get into this, if you will.
Oh man, do I have to
do it just like a stanza?
All right. Stop communications, incognito cognitive manipulations. Flat earthers are flat earthing because Jesus saved them. Summed up a life sentence with a pad and a pen, but whose language isn't which language? What's strange if you're a stranger? I'm just a lone horse neighing for my Lone Ranger.
Yeah, he got some flow, doesn't he? God, I'm impressed.
No, that's ridiculous, man.
Hey, wait, dude, when you got no rhythm like I do, it's impressive. I mean, I play guitar, but even still, I have to fight just to get the rhythm. And I took music theory. I even took years of playing clarinet, believe it or not. A lot of people don't know that. I was a clarinetist. I was a first chair clarinetist. And I took music theory, and even still learning rhythm, paradiddle, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I mean, I learned all that shit. I can't do it though. So I'm one of those people that know the theory but don't know the practice.
So I grew up like I was like, if Robert Frost was an emo teenager, like that was me. Like I was just like this little poet that sat in the corner and self-angst and teen depression, all this other shit. And I just wrote poetry. Like that's all that I did. And I didn't even get exposed to the rap culture and rap music and hip hop until, my early 20s. And it was just something that just naturally went with me. And I was at a party one night, I was drinking and everybody was over there freestyling on a beat. And I was listening to him and I was like, man, it's like poetry. Like, and I just stepped up there and just started throwing it down,
isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I wrote poetry in high school, and I have one other. I read one the other day during our show, the Non Sequitur channel, but I have another one that I wrote that I kind of really like, but I wasn't memorized to the point where I was going to like do it by memory. So I'm going to write it down again, most of what I can, and then I'll say it. But I thought it was like a decent poem.
I was going to go ahead and say that after hearing Jim rap, sorry, Steve, unsubbed.
I know. I'm already. You should see people telling me lately, "Oh, Steve, I'm not watching any more of your stuff lately because you're just dishonest." I'm like, so wait a minute. So putting forth the narrative that you can actually validate using sources, citations, logic, reason, experts, and pretty much literally every accredited college that I can find is dishonest now. That's a unique word to use in that situation. By the way, we do have Cyrus, we have John P, and we have Crystal Ignition here. You can't see them on the outside because they don't have their cameras, and I'm using a virtual camera.
Crystal just messaged too that she can't hear any of us.
Crystal's a he, but
yeah, Crystal's a he.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Misgendered. You're fired.
Hey, Jim Majors, my rap nemesis. What's up?
I'm sorry, new phone. Who's this?
That's John P. Oh, you don't. No. He's already forgot about you, John. He's already forgot about you. How's cold?
No, I'm just kidding, John. What's up, man?
That's all right. Everything's cool. Yeah, you can lay them beats down, buddy. All I can do, I gotta write it out ahead of time. You just walk up to the mic and.
No, as somebody said in the live chat, I am whiter than sour cream.
I'm so white. I'm practically translucent.
Nice. He's see-through.
Nice.
So let's dive into this real quick. What's funny is most of the people that watch my channel and even probably say non sequitur for the most part, I would say are non-believers. We have a lot of theists that come around. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we have even theists that are admins and chat moderators. I mean, we have no issue with that, right? It's not a tribalistic thing. We're saying, well, if you don't believe, you can't be a part of our programs. You can't be a part of the channel. No, I think that if somebody has a similar mindset where they want the similar goals, like we had discussed a little while ago about normalization of things, Jim, and the goal of like promoting good science and promoting evolution versus creationism, promoting things that get rid of flat Earth. I don't care what a person's belief is, the God belief or not. I only care how it influences people.
Right.
I would be called a friendly agnostic, like they have a friendly atheist. That means somebody who, it's not against people believing, as like an anti-theist would be. And again, either one's fine. But as long as their beliefs don't encroach upon me, I really don't care that much, right? I really, really don't. So I kind of want to talk about things that do encroach on at least my channel and education, because the comments that I've seen lately, especially from the one that I had on Matt Dillahunty, just ridiculous. I'm really a little taken aback at the amount of tribalism I saw, because not one of them actually explained why the logic was wrong. Not one of them actually cited anything of any consequence. I had one person cite one paper that wasn't even a paper, actually, and I know what exactly it was. I read it. The person who cited it didn't. It was from the Oxford Handbook of Atheism by Steve Bullivant, who's a Christian theologian. It was an opinion piece. So he's quoting somebody who's not even an atheist as an atheist source, which is kind of odd, that he didn't even read. And so it's just, I want to get rid of this notion that you have to like believe anything that an atheist tells you just because they're popular. It's not the case. And we've seen a lot of these things going on recently. I know that Cyrus has on his channel videos, and some of them I've even helped him with and been part of and been very grateful to do so, about atheist bad arguments. Jim has quite a few too, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, we already know that theists are bad about cherry picking information that is relevant to what they're talking about, but is not in context to where they're sourcing it from. And that this is just another instance. And I mean, the atheist community is really bad about it too. Like take the Jesus mythicist position. You have a lot of people. A lot of people who write papers on this. They'll reference people like Bart Ehrman. People who aren't Jesus mythicists. They will cherry pick information from different sources to validate their own viewpoint.
I literally saw that the other day on Facebook. Somebody actually quoted Bart Ehrman to support their Jesus mythicism things, and I said, "Do you realize he's not a Jesus mythicist?" They didn't know that.
That'd say Ehrman's one of the most virulent purporters against mythicism. He has a bone to pick in that race.
But I thought it was kind of comical that they actually quoted Bart Ehrman as the support of mythicist position. I'm like, wait a minute, do you not know that he doesn't support that particular position?
Right. Well, it's because these websites they're getting these things from, they quote people like Ehrman and they don't provide the full context, and the people are only going to these second, third, fourth hand sites, getting this information instead of going directly to the source, like looking at the quote and saying, that's interesting. I wonder what this is about.
Yeah, they're called secondary redactors.
Or third
redactors. Yeah. And we see that a lot with creationism. And again, people always ask me, Steve, why do you compare militant atheism to creationism? And it is because I see very, very few differences. I want functional atheism to be a part of things. I want atheism to be the narrative that has pushback to the bad theistic arguments. I want atheism to have good arguments. I don't have to be an atheist to want that. I want everybody to have good arguments. And when I see them using secondary or third, redacted sources, and they're wrong, that's not good scholarship.
Right, but I believe that it's possible to be militant and also have honest arguments.
Fair enough. No, I'll grant you that. Yeah, I'm a little flippant in my terminology for militant, because the militant atheists that I've seen, they're the atheists out there that just have the Horus arguments. They're the ones that just don't understand the concepts. I mean, we see it on Twitter all the time. There's been this one guy who blocked me ages ago. His name's Cube Steve. Just a rock. And everybody that has been engaging with him lately has just been pulling their hair out, and they're all atheists, and they're just going, damn, dude. And it's because they're just parroting. They have no concept of the actual materials, and they do rote It's not even memorization because they don't even memorize the correct material. They just parrot what they think is the narrative. If I hear one more person say something like agnosticism deals with the knowledge, then I clearly, the first thing I think of is this person's never read a book in their life on the topic.
I think Crystal is finally with us.
Crystal.
Hello.
Hello.
I just want to point out that I agree with you, but on this one thing is that secondary sources, tertiary sources, that's all across the board. That's not specific to any sect or whatever. I think a lot of people will get their information and then move on with their day.
Well, the only problem is that they only go so far to get their information. They only go as far as to validate their position, and they don't bother going any further to conclude whether or not that validation is truthful.
It's confirmation
I agree
bias,
with you.
Right.
It's not entirely. I think there's going to be a lot of that, sure, but I think there's also going to be a lot of, hey, even on, say, more reasonable. Okay, let's take something like fishing. Someone's going to go to their favorite fishing YouTuber and say, oh, they put up a video about this rod. They're saying this rod is really good. This rod is really long and it really swings in there. Okay, I'll stop.
Are we still talking about fishing?
Don't stop. Don't stop. This is getting good. Go ahead, finish.
Anywho, okay, so the person was like, okay, this is a really good product. It's from someone I watch often, but that doesn't mean that product is good. It just means that that person trusts that YouTuber more. And what I'm saying is that it happens everywhere, not entirely because of confirmation bias or anything like that. It's that not everyone puts in the time to look up stuff.
But that's the problem. That's the argument we're making. They're lazy about it, and all they're going to do is find things that confirm with their already existing bias. When they hear things that are against what they've been told, like what I put out, there's a shock value to them because they have pushback. They have an encroachment or some entrenchment effect, and yet people have known me long enough to know that I have validated my shit to the point of you have no idea how many people I ask about these topics that I have great amount of respect for, that are actual experts that I go to and I run my arguments to them, and they will be happy to listen. We'll have off airs talking about things, right? So it's not going to just pulling this stuff out of my ass and throwing it out there and go, oh, look, I have an idea. No, I validate, I correct, and I fix the errors before I even most of the time get these arguments out there. Because of course,
that part is weird.
But
I mean,
well, let me finish. There's certain things that are just not debatable, right? I mean, there's certain things that when I put out information of this is something that if you want to pass a course, this is what you need to know. No different than any other subject out there. If you want to learn biology, you got to know what evolution means. If you want to learn biology, you got to understand ATP synthase, right? So when I do my videos,
at least know what it means. You don't have to believe it, but at least know the
right. You could say ATP synthase is designed by Jesus, but you know what? That doesn't matter when you're in that college course room, that you have to understand what those proteins and that enzyme does. Sure. And I've been able to explain that using videos. Nobody's ever gone back and said, oh, well, hey, Steve, your videos on biology, I don't agree with you. Nobody's ever said that I'm aware of because they're biology.
Well, and the problem is a lot of these people parroting these beliefs, they're never confronted or asked for sources. And Steve and I talked about this before the chat, but I mean, often, you'll have somebody like Steve say, okay, well, what are your sources? What peer-reviewed papers do you have? And they will frantically go looking for something because they have never actually validated these things before other than these third-party sites. And so they are looking for something that validates their opinion and frantically searching for it to the point that when they do send people like me or Steve or whoever is asking them for validation, some link or a source, that they haven't even read it themselves. And oftentimes it refutes their argument. Yeah,
and the funniest part is they send it to me like I've never seen it before. I say all the time, with the exceptions of Flew, 1972, Martin, 1974, Smith, Smith, 1974, Martin, 2010, and Boulevard, 2017. What do you got? I mean, I've already read those papers. Okay, I know what's in them. You don't need to cite them to me. If you do, just put the name and the year. That's all you gotta do. Say Boulevard, 217. I know what you're referring to, right? That's how it's done for a proper citation. You don't have to send me the entire link. I'm not new to this topic. Okay, so I will ask you. The first question I have to ask them is, though, okay, have you read the paper? And they'll tell me no almost every single time. Like literally, they've not even read it. Then I'm like, do you understand the difference between an opinion piece? The Oxford Handbook of Atheism is a collection of opinion pieces. It's a persuasive book. It is not a prescriptive book. It doesn't tell you what you need to know if you want to go past Philosophy 101 in Oxford. That's what they don't understand. There's a huge difference between, okay, we want to have an argument that this is the way we think it should be. Okay, fair enough. And Jim has arguments that he wants to normalize atheism, and he has decent arguments for that. Fair enough. Those are persuasive arguments. Nothing wrong with that. But if Jim was to say, well, Stanford teaches it the way, the American Atheist teaches it, there's going to be a problem because they don't.
I actually took it a step further. On Secret Discord, there was someone going and like, hey, my video, it disproves atheism. It's really, will do it right. And I'm like, okay, join me in voice channel right now, because I've also got a video that disproves your point. I will watch your video while you watch mine, and we can both compare.
Well, let's
at that moment.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
He didn't want to.
They usually don't. I have open forums.
Yeah.
I've invited every one of those people to come in and talk to me. And one of them even said he had a girlfriend in philosophy who was, quote, flabbergasted. I'm like, oh, great. Send her my way. I'll talk to her. I'll get some expert as well. I'm not against that. I have never had one of them man up to try to talk to me about these things in real time. But think about this, Christian. You said something that was really interesting. You said I can, well, not you, but whoever you talk to, I could disprove atheism, right? Right? I can show that it's false. Now let's think about this. This goes back to the crux of understanding concepts. If atheism is not a proposition, you cannot prove it false. You cannot show it false. You cannot demonstrate it false. It's not falsifiable if it's not a proposition. Only propositions are true and false. Beliefs are not true or false. If you think about it, propositionally speaking, you can have a false belief, right? My belief can be false because the proposition, let's say let's say I believe God exists. Let's say God does not ontologically exist, right?
I'm going to have to actually apologize here because I didn't actually quite mean that's what he said. It's just a hyperbolic.
It's fine. No, it's fine.
For
it's
the
fine.
story.
But it works because I might have a false belief, but to show that atheism is true or false, it has to be a proposition, right? You have to show that propositionally it's true or false. And if you have just a lack of belief, that's no longer a proposition. So atheism, as people like to define it as somebody who just doesn't believe, is not propositional at that point any longer. You can't say it's true or false. Is it true or false that you lack a belief? Sure, but that's not what the people mean by that.
Is anti-theism propositional?
Anti-theism is not a proposition. Anti-theism is a belief that the concept of God, people shouldn't have it. They're against the belief of God or of religion. A theist could be an anti-theist.
And can you be an anti-theist against faith specifically, considering how intrinsic?
I don't think so. They call that a pistivist, which is a made-up word that meaningless. That I think it makes no sense. But people will say like anti-theist means somebody who believes that God doesn't exist, and I just cringe. I hear atheists say that all the time, or a few of them, and I'm like, no, that's never how it is. There's no college will teach that. It's like anti-hero. An anti-hero is still a hero. He's not a villain.
Yeah, he's just a bad hero.
He's just a hero that doesn't have the normal qualities of a hero, like courage and honor and all that. He's just a kind of a bad dude that does good things. But that's what an anti-hero is. It doesn't mean against heroes. And so when people say anti-theism is against theism, well, it is in the cards of it's against the belief. And I understand why people can be anti-theist. I have those urges too sometimes. Yes. What's that for?
When Crystal said that about
what's this?
Smitty has a dirty.
The person said I can disprove atheism.
I didn't realize it was going there.
Yeah, that's different. Go ahead, John.
The first thing I thought he said, this person said, well, I can disprove atheism is, wait a minute, how can you disprove just disprove what I believe. Like,
right, exactly. That's why we don't define. That's why we try to avoid things defined as psychological states like that.
Yeah,
Because
like,
what does that mean to disprove atheism in that regard? Then,
I mean, I've said this many times to people that, you know, when they say, well, prove atheism, and I say, well, the fact that I am an atheist, that I don't believe that God exists, is all the proof.
Right, because you're thinking it propositionally. If the proposition is atheists exist is the proposition, well, then you're the defeater to that because you exist. Now, theists can come along and say, hey, look, all men know God, but only deny him in their unrighteousness, Romans 1. And you can go, well, I reject your terminology. I reject your way of defining that. And you should, right? You don't have to accept that. But then I see hypocrisy.
Excuse me while I punch a wall.
Hang on. Then I see hypocrisy, though. If you're allowed to tell a theist, I don't accept your terminology such that you believe that we're all theists. That's your belief. But I am not a theist, right? And you will say that you're not a theist based upon their uses of the words. And yet people that come to my page are so willing to say, oh, well, Matt Dillahunty says that all men are either theist or atheist, and you have to accept that. No, you don't. That's not how it's taught in any college. That's his personal use of it, which is fine. Nobody's saying he can't do that. But the feeder to that is people like theological and cognitivists, people like agnostics that are not in that category. And so when you make these kind of generalized statements such as that, like a theist saying, well, all men are theists, I don't see any difference between that and Matt Dillahunty going, well, all men are theist or atheist. They're making stipulative uses of their own ways of defining things that are not as how it's found in the philosophical literature.
Right. I mean, it makes sense in context.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I was just going to say that it makes sense in context. Like the people who are listening to Matt understands what he says. When Steve and I are listening to him, we understand what he means. But the fact of the matter is that everybody else who's listening to him not only understands what he means, but believes that his colloquial usage is the only usage of that word.
And that's what I call him out for.
What Matt needs to be doing, I mean, I understand he has much the same goal as I do, and that's to normalize atheism. So we use that label that has been given to us. But I think it's important to distinguish, especially whenever he makes blanket statements like that, he needs to use terms like you are either a believer or a non-believer.
Which is perfectly fine. That's absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, in classical logic, you can get more complicated when you get into dosastic forms, but who wants to jump that shark? Yeah, I get. But but you're right, and so when I have people coming over telling me, Steve, they use that indexically, right, as an index. So you must be an atheist or a theist. I'm like, no, I don't subscribe to those really ill-defined definitions because they have issues with them that I pointed out many times. So don't come tell me that I must be one or the other. Yeah, I say what's logic. No, you don't understand logic. Then you're creating a disjunction from a dichotomy, and I've explained that numerous times as well.
I think it's important that whenever somebody asks us, "Are you an atheist or a theist?" I think it's important to say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Do you mean am I a non-believer or a believer?"
Which is fine. That's a better way to word it.
Sure. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Because if somebody were to approach you with that question, "Are you an atheist or a theist?" in their head, they're thinking, "Are you a believer or a non-believer?" And you say neither, they go, "Duh."
They think I'm an idiot, right? Yeah. They don't understand that because they've been indoctrinated. And this goes back to the tribalism and groupthink thing and the dogma. They've been indoctrinated to think that you must be one or the other because that's the narrative that they're getting. And I think that's I don't want to say that it's deliberate on the part of Matt, but it is on the American Atheist. I think that American atheists go out of their way to try to convince people that must be the only case.
Yeah, well,
he is on the board of American Atheists. So.
I don't think it's that they go out of their way. I think it's just that they use what resources that they have, and they don't really bother with the scholarship. They kind of depend on other people to provide that scholarship for them. I don't think anybody's really concerned with what they're sharing though, and that's the problem is that they're not concerned with whether or not.
I think it's deliberate. I talked to Pam. She's the editor of Pam Whistle, editor-in-chief of American Atheist. Talked to her a few times. She's actually said that they have two goals. One is to normalize atheism, and the other is to get membership. And she said, do not use American Atheist as a philosophical reference. So I think it is deliberate.
Oh, well, Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if they're willfully admitting, I mean, the things that I'm referring to is not so much the atheist, theist, agnostic thing, but more like the whole, Jesus mythicist and perpetuating false scholarship.
That's fine too. I mean, wouldn't you be saying the same thing if American atheists are saying, "Hey, look at Jesus doesn't exist because of this mythicism, and yet the citations they use are very, very poor."
Yeah, and they do. They do get biblical things wrong quite often, and they still have things on their site that they use these. Like, for instance, they have this thing on their site. It's like these biblical contradictions, and half of them aren't actual contradictions because they're not concerned with the scholarship.
Yeah, we've actually had shows on the contradictions. They do exist, but they're not as prevalent as people make them out to be. And right. I think people have a hard time understanding what a true logical contradiction is, as opposed to an apparent contradiction.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of different types of contradictions, and there's textual, moral. I mean, there's a lot of different.
The ones I'm most concerned of are the logical ones, the ones that say this is the case and then this is not the case. That to me, those are something they go, eh. But the ones that are just like scribal errors. I'm okay with scribal errors being in the Bible. There's one where the king becomes king at age 22, and then the other passage is 42. Every scholar out there says that was a scribal error. Okay, big freaking deal. But then you have people out there going, no, let's try to rationalize this, and they have this big old long narrative from creationist sites, and biblical scholars are going, no, it's just they made up. They just messed up. Big deal.
People do that with the genealogy of Matthew and Luke all the time. Like instead of just saying, oh, well, the scribe screwed up, and instead of going from up to down, he went left to right, and he just screwed up.
Because you can't have that, can you, with their worldview, I guess.
Right. Well, it's like, it's because Joseph adopted Jesus, and this is, and this is his father-in-law, and this is her father-in-law, and just, a bunch of crazy shit.
Can I read? Go ahead.
Crystal. The thing that's I'm a bit finding a bit weird is that I'm sure that the reasoning would be, oh, God's word is perfect, and you can have that. You can actually say, okay, the first iteration was perfect, but how does that exclude scribal errors?
Sure.
I mean, you can still have scribal errors and it be perfect.
But no, because once once errors are introduced and you are no longer aware of the original autographs, it is no longer perfect. For instance, there's no way to get past the scribal errors to see what the quote unquote perfect book was, if there ever was one.
Well,
why didn't God just give the scribes a revelation?
Well, according to Moses, according to Jewish tradition, the Pentateuch, the Torah, the law was given to Moses by revelation. In fact, some Jewish tradition believes that it pre-existed the creation of the world, and those were actually the blueprints that God used for creation.
The original can be perfect, and the rest God just didn't care. You can still have a perfect book. It's just that not the one you're reading from.
But you're saying that you can have a perfect book and the rest that God didn't care. That would be fine if the part that God supposedly dictated said that God was perfect, and so
that's the B. And that's the B, because so many creationists go for the King James version, which is exactly. There's so much wrong.
It would have been so much easier if God had given Moses a gold plate to put in a hat and read.
Yeah. Oh, well, do the Joseph Smith thing.
So I want to talk about real quick some of the. I'm going to inundate with messages from like my video. People seem to be not understanding the logic issues going on here with some of this stuff. And what do people understand the difference between a disjunction and a dichotomy? Because I don't think that they do, because what's happening is that Matt Dillahunty and other people they create a disjunction from a dichotomy, and dichotomy is basically theist or not theist, right? But a disjunction is P or Q. And those are not necessarily dichotomous, right? Because you can have, I want to eat tacos tonight, or I want to eat chicken. But there's other things I could eat ontologically, right? So it's not an actual dichotomy there. It's just a disjunction. And so people are arguing that, my criticism is logic is flawed. when I'm trying to explain to people, when you change the word not theist, and I just got a message on this, when you change the theist or not theist, and I say not theist equals atheism, I'm now creating a disjunction. I'm now saying theist or atheism, and I'm making those the only two possibilities when we clearly know that they're not.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted, Jim.
Whoops.
Oh, hey guys, my shirt is red or my shirt is blue. Which one?
Yeah, see, I mean, it's a false dichotomy there.
What are you
Laurel.
talking about? It's definitely purple.
But see,
Well,
a lot of
that's
people
not
don't.
an option, though. That's not an option. That's not what I said. I said red or blue.
A lot of people don't understand the reason why I'm calling him out for not being logical is that when you make these kinds of statements and you're saying, well, I just want atheism to be not theist, I've already demonstrated that leads to weird absurdities, right? I mean, it literally logically is shown that makes rocks and everything else atheist. You can't get away from that. If you can't just say, well, it's a person at that point. You know, if you want to change the scope, that's different. I have my issues with that. But if you really actually just say atheism equals not theism, then rocks are atheist. There's no way out of that dilemma. I've asked numerous people that are experts in logic. I even did on air with Ozzy, and he's like, yeah, that you can't get away from that. If that's the case, if that's the sufficiency to what the case is that atheists are now not theist, then yes, rocks are atheist. Now, if you want to bite the bullet on that, that's your deal. I don't, and I think it's kind of absurd. I know a lot of atheists who think it's absurd.
No, that's it's really absurd. Rocks are not atheist. Rocks are most likely Roman Catholic.
Is there a difference? Yeah.
Nice.
But again, I just have people coming to my page that just don't seem to be understanding my arguments, and yet they're calling me dishonest. And it's like, look at, you can call me a lot of things. I don't mind. You can call me dishonest and ignorant. It's fine, but you have to back that up with something. I have a long-standing history on YouTube. I know some of the biggest names and fields on the planet that I have their ear, and we have great conversations. I have yet to have a single solitary PhD think I'm dishonest.
You got a super chat from Rob Plutonium. He says, "Thanks, Steve, for continuing the conversation."
You're welcome, Rob. No, and and it's not just me. We're making progress. Jim here is noting a lot of these things too, and he wants to step up and he wants to point out to atheists, stop, thinking the terms of tribalism and dogma. Right. You don't have to. There are other ways of thinking, and to go out there and verify this stuff. Everything I've told people, they can go verify. Right. I mean, right. I'm not telling them anything that is not verifiable. If you go to college and you take a philosophy course, guess what you're going to be learning? What I'm telling you. So let me make this what's called a normative case or a hypothetical syllogism kind of thing, or it's a hypothetical imperative. If you want to pass a college course, then what I'm telling you is what you'll use, not what Matt Dillahunty is telling you. Okay. So if you want to pass a course, then my information is going to make sense to you rather than what Matt's telling you. That's it. If you don't want to pass the college course, then fine. Use what you think is the case, but you're not going to understand any of the papers you read if you decide to read any.
Right. Well, and it's not even about just being taken seriously in a conversation. And it's so important that people realize the impact of what I'm about to say. So my biggest passion is normalizing atheism. But the problem is that there are so many atheists that are acting as a roadblock to that progress by making these dishonest arguments. So the only way that we're going to get people to look at us as having honest arguments is if we stop arguing these really bad arguments just because they are popular consensus. We need to break out of those confines. I mean, especially as somebody who is who is a convert from Christianity, an ex-evangelical, I guess you could say. It's really frustrating to see so many people leave one box and jump right into another one.
Well,
go ahead.
My question is, what is the end goal of just having this one set of atheists? I mean, I can understand from like a political standpoint, normalizing atheist rights, letting us run for office. I understand that, and I support it 100%. But actually having organizations based around making a group of atheists, of atheism, it's there's not really enough to go off of to really unite a group of people outside of normalizing rights. I mean, it's good right when we leave certain religions to have a support network, but outside of that,
because it's one thing you're dealing with.
The thing is that it's not political. Like, I mean, your focus. I mean, forgive me for being so blunt, but your focus is extremely focused and narrowed. In 14 nations around the world, it is a death sentence to be an atheist.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. But
hang on. And all around the world, there are people who can't say that they are atheists for fear of their life. There are other people in other nations who will get beaten severely or imprisoned for it, in addition to these 14 nations. And in the United States, there are 6 states where you can't run for office. But it's not just about politics. It's about the way that people demonize atheists. And
now, what about their non-believer? If they say they're a non-believer,
that's fine.
Oh, in those countries, if you go to every country and you say you don't believe in Allah, you don't think you're going to get screwed?
No, in those countries?
Yeah.
No, it's
right. So it's not a matter. See, exactly. It's not a matter of the term atheism so much as it's the term of not believing.
No,
that's the sin.
No, you can be a Christian in these other countries as long as you do not denounce Islam, as long as you do not speak against Islam, but just merely being an atheist or an apostate is a death sentence.
No,
yeah, I think it's
what I'm trying to say again is I totally support that 100%. I'm
them killing atheists?
No. No, I'm all about normalizing atheist rights.
Yeah, I think we all are. Yeah, I think that's ubiquitous, right? I agree with Jim 1,000% on that fight.
You talk about the tribalism, okay, and you're talking about the atheist groups forming, and you want to focus it on the one issue, but the problem with that is it's not necessarily just a sense of tribalism within one group. It's this projected tribalism. When you have atheists out there that are saying things that are inaccurate or making bad arguments, it's the theists who have this sense of tribalism and think that we're all one homogenous group. So if somebody says something that's just totally out of line, well, then the theists are the ones that are saying, well, see, all atheists are this.
Well, the difference between us and the theists is that we'll call each other out for it.
Well, yeah, because the theists, I mean, you can just look at the different sects that are the different sects of Christianity and the different tribes of Judaism that is just and they're all from one book. It just shows you how vaguely interpreted these books are and their different dogmatic practices. You can't get 2 Christians even from the same church in the same room to agree on basic foundational Christian beliefs.
Yeah, but you don't generally see Christians calling other Christians out because they do it in private, per the Bible.
Right.
So, well, but anyway,
genuinely sure.
Super chat. Reed says, $5. Thank you, Reed. He says, I've seen flaws in Matt's logics before. Dusty has caught him in the past. Matt isn't infallible, but I like him a lot, and I'm with you on this, Steve. Thank you. And other people have too. I've told people before off the record, I'm not going to go into names, and I'm not going to go into the details, but I know for a fact people have spent time with him off air, explaining to him exactly what I've explained, and that people are very, very, very well educated. So this is not me in my own ignorance purporting these arguments. These are things that other people have noted as well. I just have to be vocal about it because I don't have a reputation that people can come after me and like I don't have a big name out there that I'm not going to get deplatformed, right, for saying these things. But I know other people that are much more prolific in around, and I don't think that they want to openly talk about this stuff, and I don't blame them for it. I really don't. I have private conversations with the entire main atheist community many times. I mean, people know I've got their ear, but I don't call them out for it, right? I mean, I understand the reasons why they say things in public and private, and it's different. I'm not judging them for that, but I'm not the only one who thinks Matt's wrong on this. And so what's funny is he was wrong. He for the longest time from like 2012 used the term agnostic atheism. He was telling people, agnostic atheist, agnostic atheist, go back and watch the Atheist Experience. And I, for years, have told people that agnostic atheism in the weak case is nonsensical. It's epistemically unsound. And then in 2017, he changed his position on that. He actually has now said, yes, agnostic atheism in the weak case is nonsensical. That means he can change. He will modify his things. But everybody out there before that was just parroting Matt going, oh, look, I'm not a Gnostic atheist. I don't see them now changing, at all just because he has. They think to themselves, oh, well, You know, we don't understand this. We don't understand why this is nonsensical. Okay, fine. Why don't you listen to me and I'll explain to you why it is. But they're not hearing that Matt's actually telling them now it's nonsensical. Matt's even telling people he had a great video the other day. He's telling people, stop telling people that you don't have beliefs. He thinks it's idiotic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I first of all, let me say I love Matt Dillahunty. I love him to death.
I like Matt too.
I'm actually doing some work with him next month with Atheist Edge with Jim Hall.
I'm a huge fan of Matt, believe it or not.
Yeah. I mean, I am too. But people like Matt do not take that road less traveled, to use a Robert Frost reference. I don't know why I'm stuck on him today, but it's I believe that people who do that just for the sake of not rocking the boat are doing the atheist community a great disservice. And I think that, I mean, people don't realize that path less traveled, if more people take it, it is no longer the path less traveled.
It's actually the path not taken. It's actually the road not taken, by the way.
I just want to say real quick.
No, it's
the road not taken by Robert. No,
I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
The name of the poem is "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost.
I know the name of the poem. I'm talking about the contents of the poem.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
I will fight you.
Hello.
Two roads diverging in Yellowwood, and sorry I could not travel both. One stranger long I stood.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite poems of all time, man.
That's a good one.
Hey, can you hear me?
And looked down as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowths.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, apropos of nothing, I just wanted to say, someone joined the chat that is named Bliss Turd.
Yeah, he's been commenting on my videos, so I'm sure he wants to add into this.
I mean, that name just kind of threw me for a loop.
Hey, you know when you sit on the throne and it just comes out right?
Yeah, so go ahead, Bliss Turd.
All right.
Ozzy's in the chat.
Who the fuck is Ozzy?
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't recognize Ozzy anymore. He's not around much. He's in Canada doing his own thing. So no, I'm kidding. We love you, Ozzy. I think I'm going to be doing something with Ozzy on the 17th. Actually, we're going to be on NCG Studios with Dr. Jones, talking about. I don't know if we're doing speech act theory or burden of proof. It's been very confusing lately. So it's one or the other. I'm hoping we're kind of do speech act theory and pragmatics and stuff like that. But we could be doing burden of proof, which, by the way, that argument is making huge rounds that atheists do have a burden of proof. I know that narrative has been out there forever. Atheists don't have a burden of proof.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, they do. And I'm telling you, the ones that are accepting it, I'm noticing, have become much better in their argumentation. Jim recognized that taking the burden of proof makes them a much better, I think, at least, debater. I think you might recognize that you've come a long way.
Well, I mean, all of these arguments, I made these arguments before I took the position that I have a positive stance in my atheism. Because before, I just thought it as a rejection of a belief, but then I started to realize, like, no, I actually have an argument for atheism. Like, I mean, I have, because I used to say that that logically logically I was agnostic, but emotionally I was an atheist, and I didn't realize what I meant by emotionally was just something that I actually held, but I didn't think that I could defend until I realized that I could.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. Again, if people, I just want people to understand the concepts. If you want to label yourself an atheist, but if you really broke it down to a philosophical level, you'd be agnostic. Okay, whatever. These are just terms. I want to know your positions. But Jim, I mean, you are now, you are not only, you're not just some weak atheist. You are a strong, avid, God does not exist anti-theist. I would place you as, right?
Before that, quickly, I gotta say goodbye. It was a nice chat.
Thank
See
you,
everyone.
Nice
do I disconnect?
well.
I mean, you hold the belief that there are no gods, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So I mean, you're an atheist by any.
I'm a strong atheist, yeah.
By any metric, and that's fine. But even if you weren't, if you just didn't believe, I don't care if you take that label or not. Nobody's arguing otherwise. People see this big straw man out there is that people think that I'm telling people don't say you're an atheist when you're really agnostic. No, I've never argued that ever in my life. I don't care what label you take. What I'm arguing is don't tell me I have to become an atheist when I'm actually an agnostic. They are two very distinctly different
and another problem that I want to bring up that I don't think that you've harped on enough. I really want to get on to these agnostics out there who say that there are no atheists. That's
weird too.
Yeah.
Chris Forrester, $20. Wow, thank you, Chris. He says, I've read your blog. Somebody reads my blog. Awesome. I've read your blog and everything you posted on the subject. I'm with you, Steve. It was difficult for me to break away from Matt's and others' definitions, but I now feel more confident and stable in my position. Thanks. That's the highest praise I can get.
That's great.
I mean, that's what I want from people. I want people to be better in their positions. And if that means I actually talked a friend that I care about the other day out of being agnostic. She's more of a real, strong atheist, but that's what her positions are. So I'm not trying to convert people to any particular positions. I don't have an ideological thing to promote. I don't have an agenda. I just want people to be consistent, and I want to know where their positions lie. I want to talk about their positions, not their labels.
Going back to what Jim said, could you explain that, Jim? That you said there's agnostics that claim there are no atheists?
Yeah, they claim that that people cannot be atheist. That all atheists are just a different degree of agnostic.
Yeah, the reason they do that, there's generally three ways to look at agnosticism. There's the archaic way, which is the Huxleyan way, which was more of a normative epistemic principle. It was basically applied
to everything, and not
it was evidentialism in a way. It was basically you don't have the right to be justified to know or say you know or believe anything without evidence, and it was borderline logical positivism that is not even cognitively meaningful unless it could be true or false. And that kind of went by the wayside when we have more modern scientific methodology, and so we don't really have any, I don't know any logical positivists anymore, but that is the archaic meaning. The other meanings, one is called a epistemological proposition. That's the one everybody seems to quote. Agnosticism deals with knowledge. Well, that proposition is that we know or don't know if God exists, right? The proposition that Huxley was saying was that he believed that we can't say that we know God exists. We can't say we know God does not exist or even believe.
Well, right? So real quick, just a fun little thing for everybody. I'm sure that the live chat's going to love this. Steve, I got a question for you. What is your best justification for agnosticism?
All right. Well, let me finish this and I'll give you that. Okay. So the third thing is the most modern, and that's the psychological stance being agnostic on a proposition. And that's the way it's more in modernity used. So when people say they're agnostic, they're really saying, I haven't taken a position on the proposition. And that's why when you ask me what's your justification, is that I'm called a temporal agnostic, but I'm also probably can be considered an evidential agnostic as well. That means that I haven't seen any really convincing evidence to sway me, to give me the belief, and I do believe in a Gnostic involuntarism. I don't think we choose our beliefs. So I can't just wake up and say I believe or I don't believe. So for some reason, I don't have that belief. And that's probably because I haven't heard any convincing arguments either way to say, I'm willing to say I believe gods don't exist. Right now, do I lean to that side? Yeah, probably. Do I think that most gods are made up? Yes. Do I think that there are some very good atheist arguments out there? Yes. Logical problem evil, which is very narrow in scope, but it's a very cogent argument. It's very I shouldn't say cogent, it's not inductive, but it's a very coherent argument. And the evidential problem evil, very wide in scope, but very powerful. I don't think Plantinga has a really good counter argument for free will defense. But other arguments like divine hiddenness and discovery of properties from gods, these are good arguments. Why there probably is the case to be made that probabilistically, probably gods don't exist. What I have is personal experience that I have to weigh into that equation, though, and I cannot weigh all the personal experiences I had in to justify yet saying that what I've experienced is not relating to a god somehow. Now, I can't also relate it that it is a god. So I am agnostic on that. I don't know, I have information. And by the way, when you say you don't know, that is not a thing to knowledge as an epistemology. That's a form of expression for epistemic doubt. There's a huge difference there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I don't have enough information either way. So I'd be what's called a weak atheist in that regard.
So a lot of people out there would be like would say something along the lines of, Steve, you don't use. I mean, if you applied those same that same methodology to anything else in life that you believe. Like you would have no problem rejecting that belief.
Well, because I have information on those things. Like leprechaun, I can look at the history of leprechaun and see that leprechauns are an Irish myth, right?
Right, but people would say that Steve, leprechauns aren't going to send you to hell. Aren't you hedging your bets?
No, because I'm screwed either way. I'm a non-believer.
Okay.
I don't believe, right? I mean, if you look at it, the ones who saved are believers. I'm not a believer. I'm fucked either way. So how am I hedging my bet? How is it Pascal's wager? I'm in the same boat as an atheist in that regard.
Well,
but I don't believe in hell
because you have no problem.
I can't hear both of you at the same time.
I was saying because you have no problem, immediately disregarding leprechauns or things that don't have an influence on
it has nothing to do with the influence, though. I can trace back the history of leprechauns and see that they are a myth.
And you can trace back the history of gods as well.
I don't think that I can make that conclusion of there being no God. Do I think? I mean, if you look strictly at the God of the Bible, the way that most people purport it to be, yeah, it's bullshit. Younger creationism is bullshit.
How did leprechauns come to be?
Irish mythos.
An Irish mythos based on what?
But that's but that's an analogy, right? You're saying because of one, then the other, which is not a bad argument. It's just not convincing to me. There's a difference.
Okay.
And by the way, it is convincing to a lot of. Let me finish. It is convincing to a lot of people, and I think it's justification for them. So when people say, "I believe gods don't exist," because of that argument, because of myth, and we've seen other gods being created, I don't fault them from them. I tell them that's a good justification, right? I really think it is. It's just I have to put this into account things that I can only look at from my own personal viewpoint, right? And then the argument against that is, and because I know all the arguments, is that if your personal subjectivity is in review, then you have to allow for other people's personal subjectivity. And I bite the bullet on that. Hey, first of all, glad you're still alive, Ozzy. We are wishing you well. Glad that you haven't succumbed to the freezing cold flu case. Okay, well, nice talking with you, Ozzy. It's been real, dude.
What, he's gone already?
Hang on, I don't think he.
Well, can we at least acknowledge that there's more possible ideas of God and gods than others? Like, so we can't say, oh, there's no unicorns. Why should we look at gods any same way when people are talking about God in like a Platonic sense, or like the way that Aristotle viewed it, like the prime mover. So there's some arguments that are a lot better of God's existence than others, I would say.
Yeah, and again, I'm looking at it globally. I'm looking at it from there's no divine being of any kind that's somehow created everything.
Yeah.
All right, now you got audio now, Ozzy? Okay, Jim, can you wave to him or something? I think he can hear us. Can you write to him and tell him to? I'm trying to.
Ozzy, if you can hear us, click that arrow beside the microphone and fix your audio settings.
I don't think he can hear us.
Are you there, Ozzy?
I'm writing him. I don't think he's seeing either.
I think he's reading my chat right now.
I don't know why Zoom is like everybody else seems to have no problem with it.
Well, on my smartphone, or my Android, it just pops up automatically as soon as you get into the meeting. The box pops up to pick which audio.
Yeah. It says you have a little green box, right? Oh, he can't hear. Oh, you can hear now? Oh, his mic's not working though.
Turn your mic on.
So what you're gonna do is go down to the very bottom where it says mute and the little caret next to it on the app, and it says select a microphone. Select your microphone because you probably have that deselected. Okay, Ozzy, look at the very bottom. You see that little green mute at the very bottom on the left? There's a little caret up that looks right next to it. Click that and a little menu comes up and it says select a microphone.
And make sure there's not a line through your microphone. That means it's muted.
No, it's not muted. It's a selection. You'll say select a microphone. Mine says like USB, Amos system. No, you don't see it? How does he not see it?
It won't pop up until your mouse is over it, maybe. It's right beside the stop video, right?
Yeah, go down to the bottom. No, he doesn't see it. I see screen sharing is not going to show it, I don't think. He doesn't see anything visible.
It doesn't show that his mic is muted, so
if
I
I
don't know
screen
what's going
share, I
on.
don't think it's going to show this, but I'll see. No, it doesn't show it if I screen share.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Was it the selection? Ozzy?
Mhm.
Was it that your mic wasn't selected? Okay, what's going on now?
Now he can't hear us.
No, I can hear you now. It's just I was hearing you talk about 3 or 4 times. I'm not sure why that was
All
happening.
right. Well, so it was that you didn't have the mic selected?
Yeah, it gives me this option when I start to select my microphone. It says, do you want to use your computer, microphone and audio? And I don't know if I should select yes or no because I'm wearing earbuds. and
Okay.
these have
Well,
a
no, you got it working now, so awesome. So
Yeah.
first of all, glad that you're not dead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm half dead with the flu.
How cold was it up there?
It's not cold. In fact, it's extremely mild. It's hovering around the freezing point right now. It's actually very mild. It's not.
It's not cold. It's never had freezing.
It's, well, it's
Wow.
not-
So wait a
it's
minute. I
nothing
want to get
around
this
here.
on record. You think like -1C is warm? Because we hit -1C the other night. It just barely froze. And you think that's warm conditions? Because
I don't even put on my mitts to shovel snow in that
Wow.
temperature.
See, I'm telling you, I'm in California. We put on jackets when it hits 90.
No.
Yeah, well, we're not getting over 0 Celsius until Monday here.
Wow.
And I'm only in Oklahoma.
I don't recall it getting down below 0 Celsius here in quite some time, but it did the other night.
What's this Celsius you're talking about?
Yeah, it's one of those weird scales that only Canadians and Europeans use.
It's that one system that the United States just couldn't quite, figure out.
You know,
Hey, I
I
wanna
really
ask-
hated having
I'd
to
like-
learn it, but I had to. No choice. You have to in engineering. You've got to learn metric, or
Yeah.
I'd like to ask everybody a question.
Sure.
Because in the title it mentions tribalism. Now, in my life, I'm an atheist, okay, but everybody within my sphere of influence, everybody that I love, believes in God, and I only encounter atheists online. And I was just wondering what it was like for anybody else, whether in their everyday lives, in the real world, if they encounter a lot of atheists, or if it's just online.
Well, if I could for like 20 seconds, then maybe Ozzy can answer that too. I know other people actually go out and talk to people in real life. I have as well. I go to a coffee store. I listen to what they think of as what atheism is. I ask them very direct questions. What I notice is that the people putting forth these narratives of what atheism is, and they say, well, go talk to an atheist. Well, they want people to go talk to the atheist they see online, which is a very small sect of what atheism is worldwide, I think, because the atheists I talk to, they don't have the same narrative. They don't even know how any of these people are. I know atheists. I've never heard of Matt Dillahunty. Never heard of even Richard Dawkins. My baby's mama, who I was out with the other day with my daughter to go see my mom, she never even heard of Dr. Lawrence Krauss. Right. I mean, so the names that we think that are very well known, the average person may not necessarily know of very much. Right. And so what I see is that they see this very small section of atheism and think that's what atheism is across the board. And so when they hear somebody telling them, well, that's not necessarily the case, especially that when you talk about the normal, because they say, well, they're using the most common understanding or the most normative understanding. I push back on that because I don't think it is the most common. And I certainly don't think it's the most normative by any stretch of imagination, because what they mean by normative is not how I would use the term, because if you want to understand how these papers are written, you're going to be using it the way these words are more found in SEP, IEP, and other sources, not the way that American Atheist is going to define things. You won't understand the paper. And I have citations for that. I have one from Dr. Moser. The very first thing is, okay, the easiest way to define atheism is the belief that God doesn't exist. It's the very first thing that he writes. He calls it simple atheism, and then goes from there. But anyways, Ozzy, what you have had some experience with this too, I think, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, I live in Canada, and the concern about sort of deep-seated evangelical belief is not so great here. I mean, we have plenty of evangelicals here, but nothing like in the States. And it's a much more secular country, and people who are religious are just much more laid back about their religion. They don't think it's important to put on big displays of religiosity. There's no sort of national prayer breakfast and things like that. Those would seem kind of tacky and gaudy if our politicians engage in those kinds of things. And every once in a while, some politician will do something like that, and it always strikes people as kind of out of place and bizarre, or like a bit of an imposition of their own philosophical outlook on other people. So I certainly run into plenty of people who are religious. Most people are nominally Christian around me. There's a huge number of people who think there aren't any gods, who are atheists, in the narrow sense of the word atheist, the more traditional sense. But they're not part of movement atheism, right? They're not part of the atheist online movement or anything like that. And so their understanding of what these words mean and the significance of them is not informed by that online discourse of movement atheism. I mean, I was an atheist most of my adult life before, there were YouTubers making videos about this kind of stuff. And I operated at the time, I was an aspiring academic, and academia, fair to say in Canada, in academia, most people are at least non-believers and agnostic, if not outright atheistic. And, they are not sort of animated by the online discourse, right? But I think what happens is a lot of people, to the degree that they are at all informed on the subject of theism and atheism and agnosticism and how these terms are ordinarily used, they are either operating with what they have always heard outside of that discourse, that online discourse, and they come away thinking that, well, an atheist is someone who thinks there's no God, a theist is someone who thinks there's a God, and an agnostic is someone who's sort of undecided and on the fence and inconclusive on the matter. And that's about the extent of the definitional rigor that they have. And then when they are introduced to the online discourse, then there's all this kind of hair splitting and logic chopping and redefinition of these terms. And then, they hear and see enough of these videos that they think, oh, well, these people must know what they're talking about, and they must have, a more precise or rigorous definition. And so a lot of people sort of get reoriented in this way, and that's fine. I mean, like, it can happen that a term undergoes a semantic shift, right? So all of these terms can undergo a semantic shift. But that to me doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how people define the word atheism. I think that the atheist movement has sort of adopted a strategy that I think is not a good one. But they might win the day, and eventually everyone comes to see these terms defined the way they would like to define them. But it won't change the important point, which is when someone says, where do you stand on the question of God's existence? What's your position? Defining your position as a non-position, or defining agnostics as belonging under the same heading as you, if you're a person who thinks there's no God or something like that, isn't going to do anything. It's not going to actually answer the question of what your position is. That's certainly not a rational defense of whatever position you have. If you subsume yourself under a broad umbrella that encompasses many different positions, then of course that label doesn't name your position, and so there's no burden associated with it. But that doesn't mean you don't have a burden of justification,
right?
Whatever the hell your position actually is, and it's a mistake to play hide the ball with what your position is. I think that movement atheism would do well to sort of move away from that old strategy that they've employed, and just fully embrace the idea that they think gods are bullshit, and say why. It's not like there aren't reasons for thinking gods are inventions.
That's what we were just talking about before you came in.
Yeah, see,
Jim's on board with that. I think Jim agrees with that.
Well, yeah, that's what I want to do. But the only problem is that label atheist is only used because that label was given to us, and it's still being used outside of the community to refer to us. So as long as that happens, we have to normalize that label. But just like you said, Ozzy, I mean, when people are asked to define their positions, any position, like you never answer with the label that you ascribe to. you answer with the contents of your belief within that label.
Yeah, well, I'm all for destigmatizing the word atheism, but I don't think it's a good way to destigmatize the word atheism by appearing to be snaky and evasive in what you believe. That I think
I don't think
right into, but I think that's what happens is there isn't a theist out there who has a disparaging view or stereotypical view of an atheist who is fooled into thinking that I and Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra and others don't actually think that there's no gods. We all think that there's no gods. That's the view that we have. And defining atheism as lacktheism, as lacking theism, that doesn't do anything to impress our opponents. They just come away thinking that we're pregnant, we're unwilling to take on the burden of the position that we actually hold.
I agree, but if you were to get a theist, I mean, if the theist were to see somebody like Steve, and Steve were to explain the position, and then you were to ask the theist to subscribe him a label, they would, or to issue him a label, they would label him an atheist, because that is the colloquial usage. Not just within the atheist community is it a problem, but it's within the problem of our opponents, the ones who gave us the label originally. The label it isn't given in modern times to just people who believe there are no gods.
But do you see the problem with doing that, though? I mean,
with a non-belief.
When you assign somebody else the particular label, obviously there's pushback because you're assuming them, right? And people that do hold those actual positions, people that are agnostics, they're not going to like that, right? If you're trying to gain as many people as and I'm not speaking to you directly here, but if atheists are trying to get as many people on board with them, then I think that doing so by assuming people against their own will is not the way to go about doing it. I mean, focus on the fact that we talked about earlier, people are non-believers, right? That's the thing that actually binds everybody together. None of us believe in God. Who cares if you take the label or not? Now, I do agree that normalization is important, but as soon as people start telling agnostics they're atheists, agnostics going to say, screw you, we don't want to be a part of your group.
I agree, but you cannot equate non-belief with atheism. That might work one way, but that is not a two-way argument.
Right, but you agree, but you know the difference. You agree that agnostics are not atheists.
Well, sure, I do. But what I'm saying is, if you demand now that everybody who is agnostic not adopt it, but understand and accept that they are using the wrong terminology when they call themselves atheists, then you are weakening the progression of the normalization. Well,
I don't think that's the argument. I'm not saying that they're wrong to do so, right? If somebody understands the differences, I don't care what they label themselves. Aussies know me a long time. I've never gone out there and said, hey, look you're a philosophical agnostic. You have to call yourself such. You can call yourself an atheist. I don't care. As long as I understand what you believe and you don't believe, I'm good with that.
But
what Aussie's talking about and what I've seen is I've actually seen people that have literally said all gods are bullshit, but I only lack a belief, therefore I don't have a burden. I can't count how many times I've seen that. Right.
But what Aussies, or what I'm getting from Aussie, and Aussie, please correct me if I'm misrepresenting your position, is that it's counterproductive for agnostics to hold the atheist label.
Yeah, I think it's it's counterproductive to us atheists. Those of us who think that religion has an unfortunate grip on our culture, and that we are disparaged because we don't believe. I think it's actually disadvantageous to all non-believers, but specifically atheists, because atheists tend to be the ones that are most outspoken. Remember, an agnostic very often almost always is someone who is really on the fence, either for philosophical reasons, they think that the question is unanswerable, or they just think, well, maybe it's not unanswerable, but I don't have the answer, and so I'm undecided, so I'm on the fence, right? But the difficulty I see here is that when you subsume people under a label that they have explicitly rejected, they're going to resent it. And agnostics resent it mightily to be called atheists, for the same reason they resent it mightily when a theist tries to say, well, you're actually a theist. Why? Because I'm defining, supposing they were to do this, I define a theist as anyone who lacks belief in the non-existence of a God. There, I mean, every theist believes in God, right? So anyone who lacks belief in the non-existence of God is a theist. Well, there you go. Look at the agnostics. They lack a belief in the non-existence of God. Therefore, I'm going to subsume you under my label of theist. And of course, every agnostic would say, what the heck are you talking about? right? That's a terrible thing to do, right? Don't, and it's terrible in the sense that it's just dishonest. It's terrible in that sense. It's not actually hurting anyone. It's just dishonest, right? So the other problem is this: organizations that lobby for the rights and interests of atheists tend not to actually be terribly concerned with agnostics, right? Who think, well, maybe there are some good arguments for theism, right? I don't know any atheists in the atheist movement who think that there are good arguments for theism. They tend to think that they're all bunk, right? But I know a lot of agnostics who think actually there's some pretty good reasons for thinking there might be a God.
I mean,
right?
there are good arguments, but I wouldn't say there are good reasons to believe.
Well, that's what they mean by good arguments, is there are good reasons to believe, not necessarily conclusive reasons,
right?
But reasons not to be convinced that there aren't any gods, for instance, right?
I can see that there's justification in many of these claims and their methodology, but it's just not justification for me.
No, you don't. But just to say that you, like me, are not an agnostic. But an agnostic is precisely someone who thinks, hey, you know what, this God thing, it's not so dumb. I can't conclude that it's wrong. You and we have concluded this is twaddle. Okay. Yeah. But an agnostic is precisely someone who doesn't think it's twaddle, who thinks, you know what, I'm not just going to take the argument seriously. I'm going to entertain this hypothesis seriously. It might be right. And here's another thing. I'm an atheist. I think that there aren't any gods. I think that they're all made up. Some of them are ridiculous and easily refuted and are born falsified. And others are just so vague that who knows, they're just unfalsifiable, that they verge on the meaningless, right? So I don't have to have one argument against all forms of theism, right? Any more than if I think that, supposing I believe that all sports were boring, supposing I said all spectator sports are boring, I don't have to have one reason why I think that they're all boring, right? They might be boring in different respects. Or perhaps I think that no spectator sport is worth watching. Well, it might be because I think some are boring and I think some are bad for our culture, or whatever. I could have different reasons. There doesn't have to be one magic bullet, one argument against all these things. I can have different reasons, right? Well, there are agnostics out there who will think, yeah, you know what, Christianity, that's twaddle. But deism, maybe that's kind of compelling. Because the world looks designed, and they think that there has to be an intelligence behind it. Now, you and I don't share that intuition that, the God hypothesis makes some sense, and I want to keep the option open.
So I've
made up my mind on that, but I also want to insist that while I don't think agnosticism is the most rational position, which is why I'm an atheist, I want to reserve the right to change my mind, right? And when I do change my mind, I'll stop calling myself an atheist and I'll call myself an agnostic if I ever come to that view. And here's the difficulty for people who are in the agnostic seat. Organizations like American Atheists are not really agitating on behalf of the attitude and the opinions of agnostics. They are really advancing the idea that religion is false and bad, all of them. But that's not the view of agnostics. They don't think that all religions are false and bad, right? Agnostics are on the fence about. They might think some religions are false and bad, but they don't think that they're all that way. And so most agnostics don't feel that their interests are being served, that they're not being represented by atheist organizations, right? It would be better if American Atheist was called American Non-Theist and actually did represent everyone's interests, who's a non-believer, but they don't. But
that doesn't normalize.
They are advancing the atheist agenda. I think they should.
The mission is to normalize the word.
You have many agnostics out there who admit that they cannot know either way, but emotionally they relate more towards atheists than they do.
But Jim, let me ask you this.
Hang on. So they adopt the label atheism because it most appeals to their belief.
But that's their individual choice, right? I mean, first of all, by the way, people are trying to join. I don't know any of the names coming in. If I don't know who you are, you're not going to get approved. So you have to message me because I'm only allow people into the Hangout that I actually know. I mean, anybody's welcome to, but I have to verify who you are. You can't make it past the waiting room. You don't just automatically come into the Hangout. But Jim, you got to admit, there's a lot of people out there that do say that they just merely don't believe in a God, right? They don't take that positive position, right?
Right.
Okay. So there's two groups of those things. There's those people. There's one that actually really does believe there's no gods, but just always falls back to lack of belief when asked for a burden of proof. We've all seen that, right? We've all harped upon that. And the other one who has a belief, doesn't have a belief either way, right? They would be what you and I would philosophically say would be agnostic on that, right? But they want to use the atheist label. No big deal, right? But for us, like myself, who am philosophically agnostic, that's a position that I've come to right now. Now I could maybe change that later on. Sure. You can't just subsume that under atheism, say, well, you know what? You are an atheist. Well, no, it doesn't work that way, because now what you're doing is you're saying you have no actual position. You've taken the actual position that agnostics have, or theological cognitivists, and you've nullified it. And there's going to be pushbacks for that. Now I understand that the American atheist wants to normalize that term atheism. I get that. That's why they don't say they're American non-theist. But I think Ozzy is absolutely right. They don't represent what my position is.
Joaquin has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Joaquin. And then I want to ask Ozzy a quick question while I've got him in here, because I've been trying to. Joaquin, you're muted. You muted, Joaquin. You have to unmute. There you go.
Sorry, I'm new to this program, and I'm also new to being on this.
And you have to turn up your mic. You're really low.
Oh no. Give me a second. I'll
All right.
do that.
While you're doing that, let me ask
That's
Ozzy a quick question. Ozzy, two things. One, I found it really strange. I don't know if you ever saw it. I think you did, but I came up with kind of a really quick and dirty flow chart. And there's a couple things I need to change. One of them, I need to add, like, I put like soft or some hard solipsist for somebody who doesn't have any beliefs. I think it should be more of a dosastic nihilist position. But the way I started with the great debate question: does God exist? And for some reason, Matt took umbrage to that in a way that was completely unexpected. He was saying that I should have started with a proposition, which I did lead into a proposition. But the great debate question has always been, does God exist? And in the terms historically, at least in the last couple of hundred years, is atheism or theism answers that question directly. A theist will say, yes, God exists, and the atheist will say no, which would you would term as a strong atheist or philosophical atheist. But that's done at that point. That's a yes or no question. But then you can answer it. Well, I have no idea either way. I don't know. Agnostic. I don't care. Apatheist. What does this word God mean? Ichtheist. There's other ways you can indirectly answer it. But to say that it was dishonest for me to ask that question, does God exist, makes no sense to me. It's a very honest question. It's been a question asked for centuries, for thousands of years.
I do think that it should have been worded differently, because
Why?
Because, like, for instance, if a polytheist were to have read it, it wouldn't have applied to them. I think that the question
yes, it would. Does God exist? A polytheist would say yes.
No,
at least
if
one
you
God.
would have said, does a God exist?
No, I said, does God exist?
Exactly.
Right. Does God, that includes gods.
Well, no, because God is a name of a God.
No, we're talking about in general. And we're not, I've always said this, and I even have it in my beliefs thing, that when I use God, I interchangeably with gods. We just have the course of discourse over these many years. It's easier to say God than it is God or gods every time.
I don't know how many times I've been in conversation with a theist, whether in in chat or live chat, where I'm typing out a message and I spell God with a little g, and they'll respond back, well, I don't believe in God, little g.
Yeah, it's just all it does is bog down the conversation. By the way, I don't know who Michael Petuli is. If you want to message me, and I don't know who Joshua Wood is. The names don't ring a bell. So message me, guys, if I let you know. But Ozzy, I mean, what's wrong with that question? Does God exist? It's a very standard question.
Yeah, well, I think it's not only not illicit to ask the question. I really think that these terms, Gnostic, Agnostic, theological non-cognitivism, atheist, all of these terms are supposed to be a typology of positions with respect to the question of whether or not a God exists, right? So you're not supposed to start with a proposition and then everyone defines themselves in terms of the truth or falsity. Or
exactly. Thank you. And that's why I didn't start with a proposition.
Yeah,
it's a question.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if someone thinks, you're having a discussion about, what political, economical theory ought to rule the day. Should it be some kind of mixed economy, or should it be pure socialism, or should it be pure laissez-faire capitalism, or anything in between? But someone said, well, no, the way we have to start with this is unrestricted laissez-faire, the right way, and then everyone has to define themselves in terms of that. And that's not how it works. People define their positions in terms of what their actual positive positions are, not necessarily with respect to a specific question and whether they agree with it or not, and how far they deviate from a particular proposition. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, when people say, what's your view on the question of God's existence? They want to know what your position is. They don't want to know what your answer is to a specific question. Also, there's also a kind of a funny thing that happens in ordinary discourse. When people say that they don't believe something, right? 19 times out of 20, that's an indirect speech act where you're saying that you believe that it's false. If someone says, hey, Ozzy, do you believe in Bigfoot? And I say, no. I'm not saying I lack a belief in Bigfoot. I'm saying I lack a belief in Bigfoot because I think Bigfoot is made up. I believe Bigfoot doesn't exist, right? Most of the time when people say they don't believe something, they're saying they think it's false. If someone says, hey, do you believe what that guy said over there? And I say, no, I don't believe what he said. I'm not saying I'm undecided, right? That I merely lack a belief and that maybe I think it's false and maybe I'm undecided or no, I'm saying I think it's false. So even when people say they don't believe, the words, I don't believe that, right? 19 times out of 20 is just an indirect way of saying, I believe that it's false.
Well, I would say in reality,
hang on one sec. There's in hopefully Ozzy can kind of, we're supposed to be talking about something like this in a week or two. Isn't there something in pragmatics where it's called negation raising, where people hear something like, I think this is the case, or I don't think it is the case, therefore I think it is the case. For example, if you say, hey, what time is the party at 3? And you're like, I don't think so. They interpret that to mean, I think that is not the case. It's called negation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a tendency for people to be extremely literal here, where, supposing a person says, hey, Ozzy, do you have the time? What I'm supposed to say is, yeah, it's 3 o'clock or whatever, right? But if I said, yep, and I didn't tell you the time, and then you said, can you tell me the time? And I said, yep, I could tell you the time, but I still didn't. You'd think I was an idiot. And that's because that's not how language is used. We speak in indirect speech acts all the time. There's nothing wrong with expressing your thought that theism is false by saying, I don't believe theism is true, right? There's a sense in which it's ambiguous because it can be construed two ways, but 19 times out of 20, then the ordinary natural language construal of the words, I don't believe it, is I believe that it is false. I believe the opposite to be true.
And that's why I see it.
I just want to say something
Sure.
real quick to what he said. Is you said 19 times out of 20. I fall on the side of there is no such thing as non-belief, because you state a non-belief every time you do that. You're stating a belief also behind.
Well,
it.
no, they're not. Yeah, there's a non-belief, then you have a belief for that non-belief. It's a second order. Like Agnosticism would be a second order belief on the non-belief. So if I say I don't believe you, I have a belief that I don't believe you. It'd be a second order condition.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a second order belief. I mean, when a person says that they don't believe something, they're not saying that they don't have any beliefs on the matter, right? I mean, you'll hear theists say this all the time. How can you can't be a non-believer? Everyone has beliefs. Oh well, when I say I'm not a believer, I mean I'm not a believer in your religion.
Right.
In fact, I'm saying I believe that it's false.
Right.
Not that I have no beliefs on the question whatsoever. Of course, I have beliefs about whether or not God exists, right? And so if someone asks me, hey, Ozzy, do you believe in Bigfoot? I'll say, nope. And anyone who walks away thinking I'm sort of on the fence is going to be mistaken most of the time, right? Because the most common way of expressing that you think that a proposition is false is to simply state that to baldly state that you don't believe it.
And that's why things are defined.
One way of saying that you think it's false.
But isn't that kind of why some dictionaries actually say that? Well, I think people get confused as they see a dictionary that says, well, atheism, somebody who doesn't believe in God or lack of belief in God, and they think that's some kind of prescriptive way of defining atheism, and yet it's not. It is that all atheists don't believe in God, but where they get confused is not all who don't believe in God are atheists. And that's the narrative that I keep trying to correct to people. When I argue things like Matt Dillahunty, when Matt Dillahunty says something along the lines, you are either a theist or an atheist. Oh, sure, I can say from his versions of the words he used and the definitions he used, okay, great. But you can argue you're either a theist or a dog and make the same argument, right? If you use that definitions, that's all it is. It's a semantic argument at that point, right? If you're not a theist, you're a dog. It's a simple.
Can I ask?
Let me finish.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, but what I'm arguing is he's trying to apply that ubiquitously across the board, and even people come into my channel and say, Steve, you cannot be an agnostic. You must be a theist or an atheist. That's where we go, no, you're getting these concepts completely confused, because I think that the people putting out the information are not putting out it correctly because of an agenda. Whether it be tacitly or it be explicitly, they have an agenda to have as many people under that name atheism as possible. And I think it's a dishonest approach to say, when people come to me and say, well, Steve, you're wrong about what Matt says. Well, no, I'm not. The logic is logic. Right.
So,
And it's bothersome is I'm being called dishonest because I'm trying to explain to people how it actually is more best understood in philosophical terms. If you go read the literature.
But Steve, I think that you are greatly underestimating the power of repelling people that escaping religion has. You run to an extreme, and I ran to the Jesus mythicist, like far left wing atheist.
Oh no, I do understand that. Matter of fact, I've seen it. I've seen people that have left religion and become just as dogmatic the opposite way.
Right. But the thing is that these people come to these terms in these communities, like Atheist Republic, for example. They come to these, I mean, under pretenses. But are you saying that these pretenses are false?
Well, what I'm saying is, isn't it okay? Wouldn't you rather have some? What is the goal to get somebody to stop believing theism and become a non-believer, or to get them to adopt the label of atheism? Right?
Neither though. Our goal is just to provide a community for non-believers, and we put in there that we are there for agnostics and atheists.
And I get that, but when people are saying, "Hey, Steve, you cannot be an agnostic," it makes no sense to me, right? They're like, well, Matt's not wrong using his definitions. Well,
that's wrong.
That's not a really great argument.
Yes,
I can make any argument with definitions.
But what I'm saying is that people who are escaping theism, they're not looking up the philosophy of atheism, right? They're having an existential crisis. Like they are concerned about their eternal life at this point. Like they are taking a sigh of relief. They've just escaped.
But don't you want to give them other options?
Taking a breath of fresh air. Yes, of course you want to give people options, but you cannot. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right, but look at
and you can't put.
I think a lot of people
before the horse.
I think a lot of people that are leaving theism may not want to jump right into that whole agnostic or that whole atheist label.
Exactly.
And agnosticism gives them a viable alternative, does it not?
But like I said, that is putting the cart before the horse. I think that you have to deal with that person's existential crisis first, and you have to help that person.
I'm not against that.
With their new.
I think you got to do it with honest means. Look, you're not a mythicist, and do you want somebody to be convinced, Jesus was a myth, to come out find out later that all the information they had on that was BS?
No, but I am very much not convinced that I can convince a new atheist, especially one that adopts the Jesus mythicist position, that their position is false, because sure. I mean, it's just something that is, and it's not even indoctrination. It's just that repelling force of a religious.
Try convincing them agnosticism is a viable position. It's the same thing. Yes, Joaquin, go ahead.
Well, I'm pretty new to atheism myself. I mean, I haven't been an atheist.
Let me just say goodbye real quick.
All right, bye, John. Thank you, buddy.
Later, bud.
Thank you.
Bye, John.
So, I mean, I have plenty of questions, and honestly, I've been looking, seeing your posts on Facebook, Steve, and I've been trying to follow the conversation, and I am struggling to follow it completely. So, I mean, I do have some questions for you guys. Actually, I have a couple questions that just came up to my mind when y'all were speaking. I want to know, is there a burden of proof for second order beliefs?
My argument is yes, and I don't know if you read my blog on that.
No.
And the way I argue it is pretty simplistically, is that all beliefs to be rational require justification, with some exceptions. We've talked about properly basic beliefs and irrational beliefs, but I'm being very general in this regard. Stephen Hoy did an analysis of my argument, and he broke it down very myopically. And I can't say that he was wrong on anything. I've already addressed some of the things, but he told me it was a very good argument. And Stephen Hoy is somebody who I really respect. He liked the argument, and I told him, I want you to go full barrel on this. Find anything wrong with this argument. And he was very myopic on it, to say the least, but I asked him to. But hang on, let me finish.
I think so. Okay, sorry.
I want him to steelman me, right? I don't know if Ozzy had a chance to read his analysis on it, but it was pretty good. But it didn't defeat my argument, right? And so the way it basically goes is that you have to justify why you think something is not the case. right? If I just say, hey, look, I exist, and you say, well, I don't believe you, Steve. I want to know why you don't believe me. Why you believe that you don't have a belief that I exist. That is a second order belief. That is a second order justification. Agnosticism is a belief on a proposition. It is a second order belief. That requires justification. Matter of fact, Jim asked me my justification earlier for Gnosticism. I was happy to give it, right?
Yeah,
Because it
I
is a
mean,
position.
just by itself, it's not, unless you. I mean, in order for it to be a second order belief, it has to be, like Steve said, it has to be attached to a proposition as a first order belief, and
Or something, yeah. I mean,
of course. So as long as you have context there, what their position is. They have a position once it's brought into context.
and also it takes away that arrow from the quiver of theists, because theists all the time tell me, and I talk to a lot of them, I really get tired of atheists shirking their burden of proof. This gets rid of that. And as Ozzy said, 9 times out of 10, every atheist I've ever talked to who says that they just lack a belief, they actually believe otherwise.
Right.
Every single one of them. I mean, almost without fail.
There's nothing wrong with. I just want to say there's nothing wrong with being agnostic. There's nothing wrong with being a soft atheist or a hard atheist, so to speak. I mean, everybody has their own personal levels of justification. Just because others don't meet yours and you don't meet others does not mean that your position is necessarily wrong. So I mean, whatever your position is, but confident in your position, but know why you believe what you believe. I
absolutely agree. But do you also see that we see when I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people say, well, you know what? Yeah, I'm a naturalist. There's only the natural. There's no such thing as supernatural. But I'm only a weak atheist. I'm not saying there's no gods. That is a contradiction. Absolute contradiction.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. What's up, Josh? It's been a while, dude.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think so. I don't think the position makes sense. That well, first of all, I think that you might be able to construe some gods naturally. So I don't think it follows from the fact that there's no supernatural. That
can you give me an example?
Well, I'm going to talk about natural gods. That's G-Man's argument, right? I mean, to me, if you say the sun is a god, then you need to tell me the difference between a sun that is a god and a sun that's not a god. What distinguishes them?
Well, I think that's
you have the indiscernibility of identity.
Well, right? I think what's important is, I don't know. So I've been getting into some deep shit, homies. Like, I'm sorry.
You've always been in deep shit.
If you can show me a natural God, I will most certainly believe in
I don't even know what that would mean.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I want to kind of bring up some philosophical nonsense. This is why I'm going this way. And so I think that I basically, the idea is that I'm starting to reject the analytic synthetic distinction.
Fair enough.
So I think if we look at the way the concept of God is formed over time, that there are contexts in which things can be attributed as gods, but can ultimately be analyzed naturally. So, like, you might say that if there's some sort of system wherein, like, we're in some sort of simulation, but we're not the programmers of that simulation, and the programmers of that simulation, I mean, ultimately, I think that they're going to have to engage in the same causal relations, but I think that you can sort of relativize the notion of God to be something like those programmers could be gods to you, right? Because they can muck about with the natural laws or things like that. So I think that you could analyze gods that way, and it wouldn't completely evacuate the concept.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
We talked about that once, Josh.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
We actually talked about that once.
In fact, Josh, I mean, are you one? You more subscribe to Quine's view that there is no analytical synthetic distinction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't have an issue with that either. Now, people got to remember the thing about confusing about the analytical and synthetic distinction is that when you read like Hume uses the term completely different, synthetic, which confused the crap out of me when I was trying to figure out what the hell was going on with these things.
But anyway, I mean, so that was one thing that I guess I didn't mean to nitpick, but I guess that's sort of why I'm here.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of like an Xbox that got left on with the Sims game in it.
Well, I don't believe that at all.
Okay.
I think that the God of the philosophers is, like, obviously false. I mean, that's my position. I'm just saying that the language is flexible. And it's sort of, I think historically it's borne out that it's been flexible given you know, like the way, just the way gods used to be referred to by the Greeks, etc. Right?
Well, it's flexible based on man's knowledge. I mean, the God of man is to put it. I mean, in I can't put it in any better terms than a God of the gaps. You know, the gods were used to explain things that people couldn't understand: the rising, setting of the sun, the seasons, the weather, and these different events. And as you progress in time and people started understanding these natural events more, you can see the development of gods to focus down more on things that to explain things like morality and evil and problems that people had not solved yet. And you can see this development of gods that's very much just an explanation of what people don't understand yet.
And we know that they're natural gods. I mean, have you ever heard Jimi Hendrix play guitar? I mean, they're all, the word is used in many different ways, you know, and you can use it however you want as long as you define what it is beforehand.
Yeah, but
Steve, which makes me want to bring us back to the main like issue.
Yeah, real quick.
Where I struggle with.
Real quick before you get to that, just want to say that just because you look at when we're talking about theism, I'm in the realm of a supernatural type being. If someone wants to argue theism is hey, I believe the sun is a god, I have to know what they mean by that, because I don't see any distinction between a natural sun and a non-natural sun. I don't know what should be a natural sun that's a god and a natural sun that's not a god. What is the delimiting factors between the two? There is
also depends on what you mean by sun. Right?
If you just use like a standard, so like I still think that. Like, let's take something like Zeus. Zeus is perfectly imaginable, right? I don't think
it's logically, Zeus exists in some possible world.
Right, but I think that if we lived in that type of world, even if we could develop a science of like how Zeus created the lightning bolt or whatever, even though we couldn't, you know, whatever, I think that in some contexts it would be right to refer to Zeus as a god.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, personally, like I said, I like to know what people's beliefs and their concepts are. To me, and again, unique. You don't have to accept or not. I just take simplistically, a god would be something that can actually change the laws of the universe prescriptively.
Yeah,
I'm going to accept that as a working stipulated definition. Now, you don't have to, but it works for me. And if I decide to change that later on, if somebody comes with a defeater to that, okay, great. I'm not married to it.
Or I would go as far to say that it would be an entity that has the at least has the ability to operate outside of natural law.
Same thing, right? You're outside natural law or prescriptively changing it or violating it. Yeah, I'm okay with that, calling that whatever that is a god. But anyways, Joaquin.
Oh well, I was going to say what I don't understand is what I think that maybe I understand it, but I'm not positive. Is that essentially what you're trying to say is that there's a group of people, a fairly large group of people who are defining atheism in this way. And under their definition, you fall, or you fall as an atheist under their definition of the word atheist. But you are essentially saying, I don't like the way you're using that word, so I reject your definition.
Yeah, it'd be very similar to a creationist saying, hey, theories are a guess. I'm not going to accept that as a working definition.
Right, and
not how you do it in science.
And because of Steve's positions and his knowledge, he uses the term agnostic because it's a better representation of his beliefs.
Yes, exactly.
What I understand is, I mean, they're technically not wrong, right? I mean, like if that's
what do you mean technically? When you say technically, means by some kind of objective standard. Technically, they are wrong.
I mean,
words are like we come wrong.
Logically,
they are wrong to people that know they are wrong. They are not necessarily wrong to themselves.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily willfully, you know.
If the proposition, listen, Joaquin, real quick. If the proposition, right, propositions are true or false, right? Can they be if you're accepting law of Scalia and all these laws of logic, then the case, if you have the proposition, it is either the case that you can be a theist or not a theist, or it is not the case you can either be a theist or not a theist, or atheist. Now people are out there saying it is the case that you must be a theist or you must be an atheist. That is a false proposition.
Well, they're using the words differently than you are.
Okay, right? But you're making a semantic argument, I'm making a logical argument. That proposition is a false proposition.
Depend on the semantics.
No,
Like,
because
does
because you can convert semantics into logic one way, but logic, excuse me, you can convert many different forms of semantics into logic one way, but logic can only convert into semantics one back one way. So when you convert that,
Nothing hinges on the definition.
nothing hinges on the definition here.
Nothing hinges. Just let me see if I can.
Yes.
Yeah, this is where I'm not
Untie this knot.
following it at
Yes,
all.
please.
Because
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense to me that if someone says an atheist is, if they say an atheist is a flower, right?
Yeah.
That's what they mean by the word.
Mhm.
And the flower, I mean, it can, I don't know, you could
All
say
right, well,
it's not a
let Oz
flower,
explain it because
but by
because
the, or it's not an atheist, but by the definition of the word, that's what it is. Like,
Yeah.
so I don't understand where logic even comes into it. It's the
all right, well,
word
let him
and the
explain
meaning
because it
of the
really
word.
actually does.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to sort of elaborate on what Steve was talking about here with this. Oh, geez, I forgot what
Semantic
it was.
logic conversion.
No. Oh, yeah, you're either a theist or an atheist.
Yeah. Okay.
So like it is certainly true that you are either a theist or an atheist if by atheist you mean anyone who's not a theist.
Okay, well, that's it then.
That's
Right?
that's
That's
wait,
what they're
wait, wait,
saying.
hang on,
Hang
Well,
on.
wait a second. The question then is that a sensible way to define these terms? Right?
Well, it doesn't matter because people.
No, it does matter.
It
Does matter because these words are
I
public.
mean, like if I. But
I can define you. I can
when they
define.
have a conversation, they can define words any way that they want between two people. Like I speak multiple languages. When I go to have a conversation with someone in a different language, we have this agreement that we're speaking whatever language we're speaking, and
Right.
we are.
Okay, well,
agreeing.
Joaquin, I wanted to find. Wait, what, Joaquin? I wanted to find theist as a dog and an atheist as a or non-theist as a cat.
Right.
So the proposition is it true that you're the dog or you're a cat? Is that a true state? Is that a true proposition?
Yes.
No, it's not.
No.
Well, yes,
It's
because
not.
you just changed the way the
man.
word.
Come on,
wait,
Joaquin. This is what we're
Right,
talking
you're
about.
saying-
Atheists need
No,
to start
you
teaching
can
here.
define. You can
Explore
define
that.
a word. In a
Even
Wait,
Jim's
Joaquin.
going, wait, stop.
say,
Even Jim.
You can say, look, I'm going to talk about widgets.
Explore that. Talk
Wait,
through
you can
that.
say, I'm going to talk about widgets. And what a widget is a widget is this mechanical, this part of the scissors, like that's a widget. So if I have 500 widgets and I put them in a truck, right? That's what it means. It means 500.
No, words don't have meanings. You have this weird notion that that's what it means. When I have people come into my page and they use the term by definition, and I want to shit myself. The only time I ever use by definition, and I try to at least, it is in math, because that example, 0 factorial equals 1 is true by definition, because it's a mathematical definition. You cannot say atheism is this by definition. That is a non sequitur, in my opinion.
But if people define a word a certain way, then it is. Then
you cannot say by definition.
Joaquin,
but they're saying this is how we're defining the word.
No, but Joaquin, that's trivial. But Joaquin, that's trivial, and nothing important follows from that.
Yeah.
Right. I could say an idiot is some guy wearing red headphones right now. Right. Now, are you going to walk around saying, "Yeah, well, under that definition, I'm an idiot because I'm wearing red headphones"? No, you're going to say, "Well,
under that definition."
That's because you define it as a trivial case. This is a trivial case.
Yeah. I'm trying to build sort of a trivial, degenerate example.
I'm not familiar with what a trivial case is.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to illustrate this. If I said, what I mean by idiot is anyone wearing red headphones. Now, you're wearing red headphones here, and I'm not trying to be prejudicial here. I'm just trying to use you as an example here so that it'll strike home, right? Now, if I walked around and I said, well, all I mean by an idiot is anybody wearing red headphones, you would be in your rights to say, well, Ozzy, what function is served? What is the value of defining an idiot this way? The word idiot is a public word. You don't just get to define it the way that suits your interests. So for instance, right now, you and I disagree, all right? Supposing that it would serve my interest to try to discredit you by exploiting the fact that the word idiot carries with it certain negative connotations, and I'm trying to tar you with the word idiot, right? That would be prejudicial, and you'd be right to balk and say, well, wait a second. I understand that it suits your personal interests here, Ozzy, to define idiot thusly, but that's absolutely capricious and arbitrary and in service of your interests but that's not what anybody actually means by it. That's not how it's ordinarily used. But even when there is a controversy over how best to define a word, we have to ask ourselves, to what ends do we put these words? What is the point? What is the advantage, right?
Yeah.
And are there some definitions that are more sensible to apply than others, right? So obviously the definition of an idiot as anyone who wears red headphones is a dumb definition, right? But imagine if I were to say, there's no such thing as a dumb definition. Definitions are just definitions, you know? And okay, yeah, that's true, but nothing important or interesting follows from that. So the question then isn't, well, you can't, in other words, you can't say, oh, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree because they define it this way and I define it that way. Because the whole point is you have one group of people insisting that one definition is the right definition. You know, Aaron Raw will tell you there's only ever been one legitimate definition, and that's, you know, lack theism. That's that he thinks is the right definition. And people over on the atheist experience have a tendency to define it the same way, and American atheists like to define it that way, right? Movement atheism likes to define atheism a certain way because it serves their interests.
Right.
But that usage is at odds with centuries in modern languages of usage, where the usage is different, where the point of defining atheism as the belief that there aren't any gods is that it answers a specific question with respect to what you take to be the case with respect to the existence of gods. So theism has been understood to be the belief that there is at least one God. And deism is another view. And agnosticism is the position variably of someone who thinks that the question is unanswerable or that they can't answer it. They're just on the fence. And atheism is the view that there aren't any gods. And a theological non-cognitivist isn't an atheist. A theological non-cognitivist is someone who thinks that God talk is imbecilic and meaningless. And so going around saying there aren't any gods or I'm undecided is just as stupid as saying that there is a God. A theological non-cognitivist is a person who thinks that the discourse is so confused and muddled and polluted and incoherent so as to be meaningless. It just sounds like people are uttering meaningful propositions, but they're not. That person isn't an atheist. That person thinks atheism is a stupidity,
right?
Just like they think theism is a stupidity. Those people, when they understand, who sort of understand theological non-cognitivism and are committed to it, those people really don't want to be called atheists because they think atheists are idiots for taking seriously the question that a God exists and rejecting it. They think you can't get as far as rejecting it as false. They think that saying that there are no gods, or probably there are no gods, or maybe there are no gods, or anything of the sort, is as meaningless as a question of the form, what's the difference between a duck? That sounds like a question, but it's not a question. And the proposition God exists, God might exist, God doesn't exist, those are all pseudo propositions according to a theological non-cognitivist. So an agnostic is not served by the lack theist definition. A theological non-cognitivist, who is also not a theist, is not served by that definition. Their positions are being mangled and misdescribed. And that's why they don't want to be called that. And that's why they're right to not want to be called that and to balk and to say, I'm sorry, but your usage in atheist, in the atheism movement is at odds with positions that are not theistic positions. And the fact that you want to label everyone who isn't a theist as an atheist is just muddying the water. It lacks rigor, precision, and specificity. And we already have terms that are rigorous and precise and specific. And you are sacrificing rigor and specificity for a political, not for in the interest of understanding one another's positions or facilitating communication. You are throwing a semantic speed bump into the mix here, and that's not a good thing, right? And I think, as an atheist myself, I think it's a terrible move. I
1,000% agree. But Joaquin, do you understand what he's saying? If I say, hey, Jim, Joaquin's an idiot, but I don't mean that by his intelligence. I just mean that he's wearing red headphones. What point does that serve?
It doesn't serve. It doesn't serve a purpose. But
right.
But I do believe that what I am doing. Okay, so Joaquin, for instance, you've heard my argument. I agree with these guys. I agree that with their terminology and its placement and its correct placement and how it's been conflated over the years. But at the same time, I believe that there is a benefit to using the atheist name to be all-inclusive for people who want to adopt the label. Okay, so for
why not just go with non-theism? I mean, that word's been around at least as long as Agnosticism, right?
You know, that's
because
the word that I don't hear people using very much, honestly. Non-theism.
I use it.
There's a reason why people don't use the word non-theism. There's a reason why people don't use the word non-theism very much.
Exactly, and
it doesn't do. No, but wait, let me state what the reason is. It's about as useful as going around calling yourself a non-agnostic or a non-theological non-cognitivist. It doesn't tell you what you are. It just says, there's all these positions over here. There's 9 out of 10 positions over here described by, and let's say non-theism, or there's 9 out of, a different group of positions that are described by non-cognitivists, right? Sure. Or so that's the problem with non-theism. It isn't that it isn't precise. It's perfectly precise. A non-theist is everyone who isn't a theist.
Yes,
but the problem is, you don't disambiguate what your own position is in the great debate when you identify as a non-theist. Just like if I walked up to you and I said, yeah, I'm a non-communist, and you'd say, yeah, but how are you going to vote? What's your view on politics and economy and stuff like that? Oh, I'm a non-communist. Well, there's a lot of people who are non-communists, but it doesn't tell you a thing.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing if I tell somebody that I am a non-theist. Like, yes, it is all inclusive, but and at the same time, I have no problem calling myself a non-theist or a non-believer or an atheist or being all inclusive in that manner and being honest about it. But the problem is that there is a negative stigma and that people have adopted this label that because even though they are agnostic, it better represents.
But that's a different argument, and I don't.
I can address that. I'd like to divest that argument, Jim, if I could.
Okay. Sure.
Finish your point, though. I cut you off there. Please
no, I forgot. It's fine.
Okay. Here's the problem. You don't destigmatize a word by lumping yourself in with positions that aren't actually properly described by that name, right?
But right? It is the label that is ascribed to these people by it is conflated by theists.
Well, no, wait a second. Atheist,
there's a proper definition of the word, as if a word can only have one.
Oh my God, Joaquin.
It doesn't. We don't. We're not. No one's saying that there can only be one definition. We're arguing about what is the better definition to.
Which is more precise?
No. It's not about which is more precise. It's about which is more beneficial.
Okay. We're talking about. First of all, hang on, Joaquin. We're talking about 4 different things going on. First of all, Jim, you're appealing to a different thing. You have a different motive. Your goal is different. You want to have a normalization of atheism. So that is, you're talking about a way to achieve your goal, which I think I agree with Ozzy. I don't think it's the best way to go about doing it, but you have reasons for it, right? But this whole thing about precision, the way it's set up, these words do have more precise meanings, or at least usages, than somebody like saying, well, you're the theist or an atheist. That has very low specificity, very low nuance, very low granularity. We want to have nuance in our beliefs. And what's happening is that when people take these sensu lato definitions and apply them ubiquitously to everybody for the normalization of atheism, and I get your agenda, Jim, I do. I mean, I think there's a better way to go about it, but you have a motive that you want to achieve, and that's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. But you cannot say that's not precise. These are more precise terminologies.
But there's nothing wrong with it, Steve. There's nothing wrong with an agnostic who better relates to the term atheism. Okay, so take the agnostic who believes in none of the gods that.
Oh, he froze. All right, real quick, then let Ozzy finish. By the way, you froze. By the way,
that I have not been introduced to yet, and it's possible that God exists out there somewhere. But if somebody was to come up to them and ask them, what their belief is, in a word, it would be atheist.
Okay, so Jim, if I say, I'm an atheist, and I'm hanging out with some philosophers, they say, oh, you believe that gods don't exist, and you're like, no, that's not my belief. Then why you call yourself an atheist? It would not be my position, right? And by the way, I just want to get this on the record. A theological non-cognitivist, in my opinion, real quick, people are talking in the live chat, and again, people can disagree or agree. I don't think a theological non-cognitivist is a theist, and I also don't think it's not a theist. I don't think that a theological cognitivist follows epistemically into either. And I know that's a violation of logic there, but there are epistemic reasons why theological non-cognitivism does not fit into this bivalence of logic when it comes to either you're a theist or not a theist. To me, a theological non-cognitivist is separate from either of them. That's just the way I look at it. Ozzy and I are going to have this discussion, but we haven't had a chance to actually dive into that yet.
But that's fine though. But I mean, if you were to ask this person to describe their position in one word, agnostic would not best represent them. Atheist would. Wouldn't you agree?
No.
What I think is interesting, what ends up happening is that that's sort of the same. That's an adoption of a kind of religious mentality when it comes to the broad definition of atheism historically has also referred to people who reject specific gods but believe in gods of their own. And
the Romans were atheist.
Right. And so the interesting thing about that is so the interesting thing about that is that notion is that it's parasitic on a person's specific God belief. So if someone says to you, and that's like why often when people will, people will think you're an atheist if you say something like a Christian, for example, might think that you're an atheist if you say, if someone asks you, do you believe in God? And you say, no, I don't believe in God, right? They might think that you disbelieve in God. And I think that popularizing atheism the way it's been sort of popularized is an adoption of that kind of black and white thinking that it doesn't need to be.
But that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We don't want that black and white thinking. It literally destroys all nuance of so many different, very intricate discussions on these like topics. For example, like this whole thing about theological cognitivists. I want to have this discussion with Ozzy because people say, well, this violates the law of excluded middle. Well, yeah, because you have to go to a higher epistemic vantage point to go look at it and go, okay, yeah, we're going to shoehorn it into classical. But classical kind of sucks for these things, right? This is one of my arguments from the beginning is that we're trying to lose all nuance of these things by saying, well, you have to be a theist or not theist. Well, yeah, in classical, but in other forms of logic, other shit's weird, right? You can have true contradictions, like in logic.
If you're in the Walmart checkout line, Steve, and the person just randomly behind you asked you, said, "Sir, do you believe in God?" And I'm guessing
I say no. I mean, and this has happened actually.
Right. No. Okay. You said you have to clarify, right?
Well, yeah, because that's my position.
Exactly.
Because they're asking me, do I believe in God? They're not asking me, does God exist?
But you
they say, does God exist?
You have to clarify. But you have to clarify because
no, I don't. Okay. Do you believe God exists?
I do not.
Wait. Okay, wait. Do you believe God exists?
I do not. I would say no.
Okay, so so you're agnostic.
The person wouldn't know. I can guarantee you that there are.
I know the difference. You have to clarify to me now.
One and maybe 1,000 people in a Walmart.
Jim, think about this. Jim, hang on. Jim, think about this. You have to clarify just like I would. You said no. To me, that just means you're a non-believer. But now I have to ask a follow-up question.
Not in context. Not in context.
Jim, think about this. You have just by answering no to that question is vague. There are two options. Either you do not believe because you believe the opposite, or you do not believe because you're agnostic on the situation.
I know, Steve. I'm not talking about a philosopher standing behind me.
But again, this is what we're talking about, Jim. You have to stick it in one kind of mindset. Either you're going to be precise or you're not.
Well, I know. What I'm saying is that people can recognize the precision and understand the precision, but still accept and utilize the colloquial usage.
Nobody's arguing they can.
So I think the part of this is an empirical issue about whether or not you're going to be understood, and I don't know what evidence there is on this or what, but I mean I'm of the mindset, and I could be wrong, but I think it's highly probable that when you say that you're an atheist, people are going to think that you believe that no gods exist. And so if that's not your position and you say you're an atheist, then you're not portraying yourself accurately. You're actually more likely to be understood. And you'll have to clarify if you don't want to be misunderstood if you say that. Because I think
so if I say I'm agnostic, isn't that clear? Isn't that pretty clear?
Well,
can I just say one thing with respect to this? I've been asked many times what my position is on these sorts of things. And not just in philosophical discussions or online discussions and stuff like that, but just in ordinary conversations, at a cafe and stuff like that. It's never happened at a Walmart checkout line, but in social circumstances that are not too far from that, And whenever I say I'm an atheist, everyone rightly assumes, infers from what I've said, from that very word, that I think there aren't any gods. I've never had a person then say, oh, so you're undecided on the question, or you think the term is meaningless, or you think that there's actually no gods at all. But it's never happened. They always assume, as soon as I say I'm an atheist, that there aren't any gods, that that's my position, right? They might wonder, well, how confident are you about that? Do you have a proof of it? Do you think it's demonstrable, or do you? But they always assume, and I think rightly, that when I say I'm an atheist, that I'm saying I think there aren't any gods. And if I say I'm agnostic, well, sometimes that will raise an eyebrow. Like I've noticed in conversations when a person mentions that he or she is an agnostic, so people say, well, what exactly is an agnostic? Like they don't know what that is. That term is, I think, a little less well known. So there is a huge stigma associated with atheism, but the stigma of atheism isn't that people will assume that you think that there's no God. The stigma of atheism is they think that if you think that there's no God, you're a bad person. And you don't get rid of that stigma by trying to define atheism in a way that makes you indistinguishable from an agnostic or a theological non-cognitivist or anything like that, right?
Or a Muslim.
Or a Muslim, exactly. What you have to do is disabuse people of their pernicious and negative stereotypes, right? But you don't do that by playing hide the ball with what your position is. You do it by embracing the position and showing them that it's sensible and reasonable, and that you are a decent human being, quite in spite of the fact that you think that there's no God. That's how you disabuse people of these stigmatic ideas, or stigmatizing ideas that they have about atheism, not by trying to make yourself indistinguishable from the potted plants in the house, which also lack a belief in a God. Right? That other strategy isn't going to work. The strategy,
and I don't think it works.
Embrace your atheism, baby.
Yeah, I think that Jim initially, I mean, I think that Jim's with the direction that he wants to go in with a lot of these atheist groups. I mean, I think that it's better for having it. Okay, normally when you have an argumentation, you have one person take one position, and you have a person taking the opposite. So if a person believes that God exists and wants to argue that God exists, the other person is going to say that God does not exist. That's what an actual argument is. Okay, so if you disagree with somebody, it means you take the opposite position. It doesn't mean not to believe them. That's not what a disagreement is in argumentation theory. So if I say, hey, Jim, I disagree with you, I am not saying that, I'm not just saying that I don't believe you. I am saying I am taking the opposite opinion than you.
I don't think agree with that.
Well, that's right? How it isn't. That's argumentation theory. I can send you some documentation on that.
Well, I mean, like, look, you might, there might be an implicit belief there where you're just saying that I reject that you're warranted in believing that, and that might be where the disagreement.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree with that. No, I'm talking about in more formal in argumentation theory. You're right.
What Ozzy said is that he just assumed, he just begged the question against the pan-intentionalist. You know, we don't know. I mean, there might be plants that believe that gods exist. He just begged the question there.
Yeah, that's true. I was assuming that the potted plants don't have any opinion on the question of God's existence.
Damn you, Ozzy! Stop making assumptions like that. We're gonna spend 5 hours talking about intentionality and extensionality now. Damn it! Let's get a photos argument. Okay, but anyways,
I think that what Ozzy said, I mean, his anecdote aligns with what I said. I don't know. I've never had an experience where I've spoken to anybody about atheism just publicly. Like, no one's ever asked me really, basically, if I'm an atheist. But I've never had but what he said basically comports with my assumption, which is just that if you go around telling people you're an atheist, they're going to think that you believe no gods exist. You know,
that's what I see mostly. Yeah.
So you're not
outside of our little communities. Yeah.
Right. So if that's not your position, then what you're doing in implementing that language is actually obscuring. And you will have to clarify, like, I mean, it's a shorthand if you want to not be understood and you want people to, like, maybe ignore you or something. And maybe it's a shorthand for that, but it's not a shorthand for a lack of clarity, because that, like, you're in that, for a clear belief, because in that you're going to be unclear if you're agnostic or a theological non-cognitivist or whatever your position is, right?
Yeah, and no, plants are not agnostic either. This is something that somebody in the community made a very disreputable video claiming they really did a hatchet job saying, you know, I was there. No, there was me of a clip saying that rocks are atheist, or excuse me, rocks are agnostic, and I was doing an internal critique on somebody else's understanding, saying if you use these types of definitions, then okay, fine. But I've never held, and people have known me a long time, that rocks are agnostic. Agnostic is suspension of judgment. You have to be able to evaluate the proposition in order to suspend judgment. Obviously, rocks can't do that. But there's a video out there saying, well, Steve believes that rocks are agnostic. No, I don't. Stop saying that I do. If you come to me if you want to know my positions, people.
Steve, rocks are energy, just like everything else. They have access to.
I agree with that. Yes,
knowledge.
all is energy. Mass doesn't exist. Yes, everything's energy. Reality is all energy.
Rocks are pure light. If you don't believe me, go running full force at one.
What is reality? It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as objects because of mirological nihilism. There's no such thing as matter because it's all energy. It's all fields.
Oh shit!
It's all. There's no evidence that it's external. Everything for external is the same for internal. So yeah.
I have never ever been exposed to more nonsense than when I entered the YouTube community.
Isn't philosophical things great?
Oh.
Well, think about that though. Honestly, there's no evidence I can think of that would ever have the hypothesis that reality is external to the mind as opposed to reality is internal to the mind. Anything that supports one seems to support the other.
I wanted to ask Jim a quick question, because you were referring to before, like somebody had the position of a philosophical agnostic, but they felt like an atheist, or they identified better as an atheist. I don't really understand that comment so much. Like,
so it better represents them, because, you know, an agnostic is somebody who is undecided on the term, and it's either because they haven't been presented with the proposition yet, or they don't have knowledge of the proposition, or the knowledge that they have of the proposition is not justifiable in them making a positive position one way or the other. But for the people who are on the side where every God belief that they've been exposed to, say they've studied Christianity, Buddhism, all the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, basically every modern religion, and a few of the older ones like the Canaanite religions, Sumerian, Babylonian, whatsoever. So every God belief that they've ever been exposed to, they've rejected based on, you know, their own personal research and whatever's justifiable for them. So, but they still hold the belief that it's possible that there is a God out there, that God concept that they have not been yet presented with, that could possibly exist. They're not fully ruling it out. So
I don't understand that. I don't understand why that caveat.
So they are still agnostic on the position. So
yeah, no, I think that's a really
but that is a hang on, damn it, because every time I get to this point, you interrupt me every single time. So, but it's such a large percentage of atheist republic of that community are people who are in that position, that every concept that they've been presented with, that's why they don't believe, but they are still agnostic on the proposition, you know, that could there possibly be a God out there that they haven't been presented with yet. And so they better identify as an atheist. It better represents their position.
Okay, that makes absolutely no sense to me. Let me explain why, because you're throwing in a whole bunch of different things. When we say something is possible, right? First of all, why do we care if something's possible or not, as opposed to if we believe or not? If it's possible, that means it exists in some possible world, right?
Right, like okay. Any God concept.
Okay, so when somebody says, well, you know, I've heard all these terms about gods, I don't believe any of them, but you know, it's possible. All it's saying is, okay, gods are possible in some possible world.
No.
That's literally what it means. World.
Well, I don't. That's fine, but what people mean when they say it is that is possible in this world.
Okay, but that's okay.
For many people,
oh my God,
this world is all that matters. This world is all that matters.
No, but you're confusing concepts here. When we say something is possible in a possible world, that means it's logically possible, and this means
I didn't say it was possible in a possible
world. Well, we are a possible world. We are the actualized version of the best of all possible worlds. If you go by the way Leibniz would call it.
No, but Steve, what I think Jim is saying here is that, I mean, most people are not going to understand the concept of possibility in terms of possible worlds.
Okay, but am I incorrect though in the way from the philosophical?
No, you're not incorrect, but neither are they.
All right, so let me put it this way, Jim. If a person, to me, and I'm just going to throw this out there, if a person is willing to say every God belief that I've been exposed to is wrong, then they are justified pretty much to say at some point, look, there are no gods.
Under your standards of acceptance, but not
Sure,
under theirs.
but again, what do they what do they care if it's possible or not? I don't care if God's possible or not so much as if it's something. I mean, we already assume that gods are possible because they're logically possible.
Why would you?
But Steve, what Jim is talking about here is a person, like some people are, when it comes to these metaphysical possibilities, some people are very risk averse. They don't want to say that something isn't the case unless they have excellent reasons for thinking that it isn't the case. And when it comes to these sort of far-flung possibilities, unless they have a reason for ruling it out, they can't rule it out.
But so
they want to be agnostic about it.
Right, and again, I get that. Hang on one sec, I get that, but that kind of reminds me of Russell's just bare possibilities.
Yeah, but there are people who are like that. I mean, if someone says, "Hey, Ozzy, what do you think is the likelihood that there's a teapot in orbit around, the sun?"
I would say that I believe there is no teapot.
And I'd say, yeah, that's a bare possibility. I don't believe that it's the case, right? But there could be someone who's so risk averse who will say, "I'm not prepared to say that I think it's false or likely to be false."
But you do believe it's false,
unless
right?
I have a positive reason for thinking that it's false. Now, I would say, well, actually, you do. I think you do have a reason. You just haven't realized it yet. But I think that there does exist a reason for thinking that proposition.
Yeah, Garvey 2010 has a really good counter argument on Russell's teapot. But you're fine with saying you believe that there's no teapot up there, right?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with saying that there's no teapot out there. But that's just to say that where I put the bar is different from another person. Another person.
I get that. I get that. I totally get
that. But the teapot has neither a carrot nor a stick. That's the problem.
Well, the teapot really doesn't explain anything. The way Garvey would argue is that the teapot has no explanatory thing, so there's no reason to even indulge the fact that exists up there. And you are justified to say that you have reasons to believe that it doesn't exist up there.
No, but people have justifications to believe that there is, and to search for that belief, and to think that it is possible, because they were introduced early on with this idea that there is a stick or a carrot.
No, I get that, but my argument is this: if you believe that it's not possible, you're automatically saying that they don't exist, right? So by saying that they don't exist, you automatically are saying it's a possibility. Because if you thought there was no such thing, if I think something is not possible, like a square triangle is not possible, right? I automatically believe that they don't exist by extension, by entailment.
What if you think it's possible?
But what, a square circle?
Yeah.
Then first of all, I don't, but if I thought they were possible, then I'd just be thinking, then I can't make that entailment that I'm believing that there's no such thing.
Okay.
You can only make that entailment if you think.
What about the people who think that it's possible that a God exists? Because I mean, I would say
anybody who's not a strong atheist.
But that concept is a lot more.
Well, even then, that's not even a strong atheist. A certain atheist, I would say. Somebody who thinks that there's no possibility of God existing is not the same somebody that just believes that there's not.
But
the proposition. There's two propositions going on there.
But the God concept has much wider margins than a square circle or
I get that, but Jim, the proposition is, does God exist? And you're evaluating that as a belief. There's a different proposition. Is it possible for God to exist? That's a separate proposition altogether.
I'm not arguing that, Steve. You know that. I don't argue that. What I'm saying is that the people who are agnostic about the belief of gods, and on the basis that everyone that they've been introduced to that they don't believe yet, they believe that it is possible in this world that there is a God, but they have not yet discovered it, then they are justified in calling themselves an atheist.
They could be a strong atheist, they could be a weak atheist, they could be agnostic. They could be any of those positions, though, that have that. That's why I see no differentiation.
I would say that such a person isn't, in fact, an atheist. I would say,
you can be an atheist.
I would say that. I think the proper way to understand an agnostic, rather, is that someone who's simply undecided. It's someone who hasn't reached a conclusion. Now, they could have good reasons for not coming to that conclusion one way or the other, or they could have terrible reasons for not coming to a conclusion. For instance, they might have been presented with an excellent reason for not believing in Yahweh. They might have an excellent reason for thinking Yahweh doesn't exist, but they don't buy the argument, right? They might be unconvinced by the argument, right? So they might be on the fence about Yahweh, for instance. Right? So a person can be an agnostic for good reasons or terrible reasons. Okay, or anything in between, any degree of reasonableness in between. But I think the proper way to understand agnostic is not in terms of how confident they are, but whether or not they've come to a conclusion. If a person says, I can't conclude anything one way or the other, then I think that they are an agnostic. But if a person says, well, provisionally I have to think that there's no God. Well, however provisional it is, if they've come to the conclusion that however provisionally there is no God, then that's what an atheist is. It's someone who thinks that there aren't any gods, right? I'm a provisional atheist, right? I'm very confident that Yahweh doesn't exist. I think that Christianity, I think, is refuted. Okay, so is Islam, so is Judaism. Most of our mainstream religions are refuted, right? They're just false. But there are certain sort of vaguer, more rarefied conceptions of gods, deistic conceptions that I think would be harder to demonstrate are false. And we have to use different kinds of reasons to come to the conclusion that those probably are non-existent. And so there I have a much more guarded view that they don't exist. I'm not as confident that they don't exist. I still think they don't exist, which is why I'm an atheist. If I was on the fence about deism, though, then I would say, well, I'm an agnostic.
But I would place that under virtue epistemology, just being open-minded. That's all. In some degree.
Yeah,
think about that. I mean, you're just if you're willing to entertain the possibility of a God, then you're open-minded, unless you have reasons not to. If you think that all gods are not possible, which I don't know how you would justify that. You could justify some, maybe, right? But to say that all gods are not logically possible would be a hell of a burden to meet. So you're just being open-minded on that, which is virtue epistemology.
Yeah. I mean, for instance, I think, agnostics have a burden of justification too. That is, they have to give reasons why their agnosticism, that is their suspension of judgment and refusing to come to a conclusion, is reasonable. Right? Because if you don't have a reason for
same thing with weak atheism, there's the same logical position. So yes, if agnosticism does, weak atheism does as well.
Right, exactly. So if
which I've been arguing for a long time. I get a lot of pushback for that, though.
Yeah, but I mean, the flavor of agnosticism is going to make a difference with respect to what your burden is. So if you are the kind of agnostic who thinks that the question of God's existence is unanswerable by anyone ever, right? Like, I can't decide, and neither can you, right? If you're that,
I don't fall into that.
No, I know you don't. But if you're that kind of agnostic, well, look, that needs an argument. That's actually a pretty big claim, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not just saying that you don't have the answer and can't come to a decision on the matter. You're saying there can't be a rational conclusion.
I would have loved to hear Huxley's argument.
Conclusion is irrational, right? Any theist or atheist is irrational. So that Huxleyan position.
He would have loved these hangouts.
Yeah, it's a very, very strong claim, and that I think that is a variety of agnosticism with a burden that is so high that I don't think anyone should be eager to embrace that version of agnosticism. I don't think that burden.
Very, very few exist.
Yeah, they're not. Well, there's actually quite a lot of people who say that.
Yeah, but when you really ask them about it, I know one. He's called a militant agnostic. He's on Twitter.
That guy.
He's New Stoics knows him. He's very militant. He is a Huxleyan fanatic. He's almost like a religion. And he and I butt heads, even though he agrees I probably know more about agnosticism than most people on the average. But he thinks that for some reason my agnosticism somehow is changing Huxley's work. And I'm trying to explain to him, no, Huxley had his own positions. I don't have to follow Huxley's agnosticism to understand what his agnosticism was, but I don't have to take that on board to call myself an agnostic. He thinks that you do. He thinks to be an agnostic, you have to abide by the normative epistemic principles, like evidentialism and stuff. And I don't. I'm not an evidentialist. I would put myself more of a moderate evidentialist, or even a non in some cases.
Just to finish up the earlier point, also, so that's one flavor of agnosticism that I think makes a very strong claim. It makes the claim that this question is unanswerable by anyone ever in principle, right? Yeah. Well, if that's your position, that's a position. You better have reasons for thinking that, and I think that's a high burden to have to try and discharge. But then there's sort of a weaker form of agnosticism, the so-called fence-sitter agnostic. And I don't mean that in any sense disparaging. They just mean they are on the fence. They too are undecided, but they're not undecided because they think the question is undecidable in principle. They just think that they can't come to a decision given the state of the evidence as it presents itself to them. They think that, well, so far I can't make up my mind. Tomorrow I might hear an argument that sways me one way or the other, but for present purposes, I can't make up my mind. I'm on the fence. I might have some reasons for thinking that it's kind of makes a certain kind of sense, right? So that, I think, is a weaker form of agnosticism that has a much lighter burden of justification than the Huxleyan form. But even an agnostic has a burden of justification.
So why do people criticize so much when logically, I have a proof out there that logically that agnosticism and weak atheism are indistinguishable in that regard. So when people say, well, I just do not believe in God, that's the agnostic position. The only thing that I find that the agnostic is willing to go further and say, well, it's not that I don't just not believe in God. I don't believe that God exists, and I don't believe that he does not exist. But the weak atheist is only going so far as saying half that. They're saying, well, I don't believe God exists. Most of them won't go so far as to say, well, I don't believe that he exists, and I don't believe that he does not exist. Although if they did, that is what it means to be agnostic on P. You don't have to take that label, but that's what it means to be agnostic on a proposition. But they're like, but the hypocrisy is that they're saying, well, you can't be agnostic, and yet every weak atheist out there has the exact same logical position. That to me is hypocritical to say you can't have one position and yet they have the same position. They're just calling it something else. I can't hear you, Joaquin.
Why can't you hear me?
I don't know. It's very, very, very low.
Oh, that's so strange. Did you just say that agnosticism and weak atheism are indistinguishable?
Logically. For all practical purposes.
Okay.
Yeah. One's not BP, then one's not BP and not B, not P.
So if someone from that group were to call you a weak atheist instead of calling you an agnostic,
okay, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Under those definitions, I'd be a weak atheist. If they want to call the position of not believing in God's a four-legged puppy, I'd be a four-legged puppy. It's trivial and is meaningless. That's a semantic distinction. I reject all those definitions.
Not meaningless, right? Like
it is. No, it really doesn't, because it has meaning to them. I'm also weak, but Joaquin, I'm also a weak theist. So what's the point? If I'm a weak theist and a weak atheist and a weak agnostic, then why I would be not happy if somebody said, "Hey, Steve, you're a theist," because I'm not a theist.
Why does it make you unhappy? I mean, because look, I haven't.
What do you mean? It's not my position
for very long, and when somebody calls me an agnostic or an atheist, it doesn't bother me at all. Usually, like if they're a Christian and they say, that you're an atheist, I think to myself, yes, I'm atheistic towards your God.
Okay, but Joaquin,
and if I want to get specific in which other gods I'm more confident in or less confident in, I can do that very easily. I just say, I'm agnostic about there being some, any sense of God at all, but I'm atheist towards the Muslim God.
Okay, but no, you're atheistic. Atheism, you can have global and you have local atheism. Okay, we're talking global at the moment. You're switching to the local atheism, and that changes the narrative a little bit.
Right, but it seems like there are lots of different.
But why?
Because there's different propositions. Global is relating to any God.
But many people who claim the title of atheist are only local atheists.
Okay, but then you have to qualify that. You have to explain to somebody. Well,
no, you do not, because
absolutely you do. Bertrand Russell wrote a whole paper on this.
But no,
am I agnostic or an atheist? This is his whole argument.
Okay, hang on. Okay, so if you know these terms, then yes, you clarify. But the vast majority of the
global
population. No, they don't just assume that it's global. They don't know what the fuck global means.
But it's
they don't know what local means.
They don't have to do it instinctually. But when you say, Jim, when you say you're an atheist, they need to take it. You don't believe any God exists, not just a single God, not just a Muslim God, any God. That's how it's inferred.
It is inferred. But then if you ask them and said, what about in an alternate universe? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe.
What? I don't even know where you're going with that.
Okay, so
let me get back to Joaquin.
If they said maybe, are they still an atheist?
No. Oh, yes. Maybe it has nothing to do with anything. You can say I don't. You can say gods don't exist, but maybe they do. You're still an atheist. Maybe you can say there's possibilities. It has nothing to do with your belief.
I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist, and I think there aren't any gods. But I'm not claiming that all gods are impossibilities.
Right. That's a distinct.
I think Yahweh is an impossibility. Right.
And I think the creationist God is an impossibility.
Yeah,
I just want to say,
don't think deistic gods are impossibilities. I just think they're false.
Yeah, there's a huge difference there.
Yeah, look,
Yeah,
if you think
Joaquin, I
gods
want to get back to you real
exist,
quick.
you don't have to have a proof of
I
the
just want
possibility of all gods, right?
Yeah. Joaquin, I want to get back to you real quick.
Say that I haven't been engaged in this discussion very long because I haven't been an atheist for all that long. But I've had zero problems in communicating with different people.
Because the people you speak with are not really philosophically literate, I don't think. But let me ask you this, Joaquin.
But even if they were, you have words for all.
Let me get this out. So you understand that you understand what I mean by agnostic and weak atheist and weak theist are logically the same. You similar. You get that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what here? I like to be consistent. Now think about this. What a weak atheist does is they're saying we're going to take weak atheism and we're going to drop the weak part. We're just going to call that atheist, right? That means
I've never actually heard the people use the word weak atheism like.
It means negative atheism or implicit atheism.
I know the word, but I've never heard it used in.
Okay, but this is the reason why they don't use it. But let me finish
because
here.
they don't know it.
But this is the reason.
I think that most people don't know it. I think it's
but
uncommon word like non-theist.
Okay, Joaquin, listen to me, please. If somebody does not believe in God, that is what conventionally is held to be what's called weak atheism. Do you accept that?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Now they just drop the weak and they call it atheism. Okay. That's what Matt Dillahunty and Arn Ra, who, by the way, Arn Ra, when he says that when he says non-theism equals atheism, he literally means that is the only definition out there possible. Okay, that's where we argue with him on that. Now, think about this: if agnosticism is also the same as weak theism, and I drop the weak part, then a theist can say, "Hey, Steve, why don't you get upset by your theist? You're a theist. What's the difference? If you're going to be consistent, then why is it that you want and other people want me to be called an atheist by dropping that weak part, but they don't see a problem with calling me theist when it's the same logical thing?"
But Steve, Steve, hang on. Steve,
I would clarify.
I can't hear both of you at the same time.
Steve, you have no problem, conceding that I have justification for my belief for being an atheist, and you say that
you're not a weak atheist, you're a strong atheist.
Right. But at the same time, you can apply some method of philosophy to say that I am unjustified. That I'm not justified in holding to atheism. That it is not possible to know these things.
What is it? Why you? Hey, see what you just did there? You jumped from dosastic to knowledge. I don't care whether you can know these things or not. That's a different question. You don't have to be able to know God exists to believe God doesn't exist. You can say I believe gods do not exist. You can even say I believe they're all bullshit. That has nothing to do with knowledge. Why even introduce knowledge at that point?
Well, because a lot of people do.
But why? I don't understand why.
Because it is important to people, and a lot of people feel like it's a good way for them to express their beliefs. For people who don't know philosophy, for the lay person, it very much appeals to a person to say that they are an agnostic atheist instead of saying
hang on, I don't want to go down that route. But okay, let me ask. Like for example, Ozzy.
Why don't you want to go down that route? Because that is what everybody. That is the problem. Why wouldn't you?
Because it's not consistent. Agnostic atheism in the weak case makes no sense whatsoever. What are you agnostic about?
It does make sense when you
really doesn't.
When you put it in context of their terminology.
It does, even in their terminology. What are you being agnostic about? You're modifying the word atheist, right? It's an adjective. If you use it as an epistemic modifier, where adjectives modify nouns, right?
Okay.
So what are you modifying? That you lack a belief? So you're saying, I don't know that I lack a belief? What does that even mean?
Yeah, that you lack a belief, that you don't.
You don't know whether you lack a belief or not.
That you that you don't have a belief in a God.
How's that? Okay, well, again, how is that any different than being just agnostic or atheist? Both of them lack a belief in God. You see that you lost so much precision.
Yes,
you throw these words together, thinking they're meaning something.
I'm not throwing them together. I'm saying that whenever you are approaching the layperson, you have to if you want to reach them.
I don't agree. I disagree with you vehemently. I think precision is a way to reach the layperson, because when I talk to the people, they get this when I explain it to them, because they're not bogged down by prior bias, right?
Okay.
But again, going back to Joaquin, do you understand when I don't want to be called a theist? So if I don't want to be called a theist, why is it any different than not being want to call an atheist?
It would bother you if someone.
Because I'm not a theist.
No, wait. Well, you said you're a weak theist, right?
Logically,
Okay, if someone called me a theist, right, I'd say no. I'm not that kind of a theist.
Okay, wait.
I'm a
Okay,
weak
let me
theist.
ask you this.
By
Then let me ask you this.
theist, I mean that.
Okay, do you hold the position there are no
agnostic.
gods?
I don't care.
Joaquin, do you hold the position? Wait, Joaquin, do you hold the position there are no gods?
Well, it's funny because maybe you might be able to help me with this. Like I said, I haven't been in this camp for very long. I would call myself an agnostic, but maybe I'm not according to you.
Well,
let me
not
ask
according to me, but answer the question is like maybe we can narrow it down.
Different people have different ideas about what things mean, right? So
well, you can know.
You guys
this is all standardized.
Ozymandias and you're both very smart people, and y'all have been arguing with each other. So let me.
I don't think Ozzy and I disagree on much actually when it comes to this stuff. We just kind of have very nuanced stuff.
That's my point, though, is that you and Ozzy don't disagree. Like
you and I don't disagree on most things.
No, I know. I'm talking about the God belief. I'm talking about.
Well, that's one thing we do disagree on. He holds the position there are no gods.
Proposition, yes, but he is an atheist.
Yes.
And you are an agnostic.
Yes, and I don't hold the position there are no gods.
So tell me what is the difference between you and Ozzy?
I just told you he holds the position there are no gods.
Okay, and you do not.
I don't hold the position there are no gods.
Do you believe there are gods?
No, if I believe there are gods, I'd be a theist.
So you don't believe there are gods?
I don't know why this is so confusing. I do not believe there are gods, but I don't hold the belief that gods don't exist. One entails the. If you believe there are no gods, that entails you do not believe. But if you do not believe, that does not entail that you believe there are no gods. Do you see the difference?
Here's the way I like to put it. I lack a belief in all gods. Steve lacks a belief in all gods. But I lack a belief in all gods because I think there aren't any gods.
Right. That's his reasoning.
But that's not his reason.
Correct.
He thinks, hey, you know what? I'm undecided on that. He will not go so far as to say all gods are inventions. I think they're all have the truth value false. And
right.
He's not decided on whether the truth value for every god is false. Exactly. I think it's always false. Okay?
So that's what I want to get from Joaquin. Joaquin, do you think that is all gods are false? There's no such thing as a god, period.
Every god that I've been.
That's not the question. No, I don't want you to hedge your bets. I'm not asking, but that wasn't the question. And this is what Jim does. I don't want to ask you all the gods you've heard. I'm not asking you that question. Do you believe? I am asking you, do you believe there are no gods? Not the ones you've heard, but do you believe there are no gods?
No, I don't believe that there are no gods. I don't believe that they're, I'm agnostic.
Okay, so
you are really an agnostic. You are an agnostic. That is, you don't think that there are no gods, and you don't think you're not.
He sounds like he's an agnostic. Yes.
That sounds like a genuine agnostic.
Right. Not an atheist, not a theist, but agnostic.
You're a non-theist, but you're also a non-atheist.
And
right? Which is fine. That's what an agnostic is, right? And is someone who's.
But that's what he's saying. That doesn't necessarily mean that his actual position, Ozzy. That's the difference. He might actually be saying that, but if you actually go further.
Well, I mean, I'm taking it at his word.
Right.
He's dissembling.
But that's why I wanted to get into more of his actual beliefs. I mean, Joaquin. So do you believe, like, for example, do you believe that there's anything called the supernatural? Oh, you muted. We can't hear you.
There could be a supernatural. I mean, like.
Okay, but these are all qualifiers. There could be, should be, would be. Yeah. I'm asking you what your beliefs are. Do you believe there's a supernatural?
I've never seen it, so I don't believe there is one. But there might be. I'm like.
Okay, but do you believe that? Do you hold the belief that there is?
I don't have a position on whether I believe or not. But
okay, that's agnostic. But I just want to clarify real quick. You don't hold the belief.
Ghosts, I don't believe.
All right, so you don't hold the belief that supernatural doesn't exist. You don't have that belief.
No.
Okay, and you don't have the belief that gods don't exist.
No.
You're agnostic. There you go. Boom. Now again, you don't have to accept that label, but that's what you would be in philosophy. You're agnostic on the proposition.
Okay.
Yeah. But see that. A lot of people get shit for that, though, right? Matt Dillahunty would say that that's not possible, and this is the whole argument from the beginning. He literally says you cannot have that. You have to be atheist or theist. It's like, no, you're not. You don't. You just show that you don't.
Yeah, there's a confusion that happens a lot. I actually saw it in the live chat. Someone was posting this. I'm sorry, I forgot who it was, but it was quite a while ago. Someone had said, "Look, there's either a God or there isn't a God." And therefore, there's only two positions to choose from. Either you believe there's a God or you believe there isn't one, right? Look, the fact that there are only two ontological possibilities, either a God exists or a God doesn't exist, doesn't mean that the only two positions you can hold with respect to that question are those two, right? That's a mistake, right? Extensionally, there either is or isn't a God. That's an extensional context, right? Existence is an extensional context, okay? But belief is an intentional context, right? So you can have more, there can be more doxastic states, that is more possible belief states with respect to an existential state than just the two existential states, right? So for instance, a theological non-cognitivist, okay, doesn't think that there's no God, nor does he think that there is a God. No, it's someone who thinks that the question is meaningless. It sounds like a question, is there a God, or does God exist? To their ears is like saying, what's the difference between a duck? Sounds like a question, but it's stupid talk, right? That's how a theological non-cognitivist sees the question, right? They think that these are all pseudo propositions. They have no truth value. They don't have the truth value false. They have no truth value at all, right? It's just noise. That's how a theological non-cognitivist works, right? So there you have at least another possibility other than true or false. You have a person who thinks that it's neither true or false. Then you have the agnostic who thinks, no, it's that the proposition of does God exist is a perfectly meaningful proposition. It's right. It makes perfect sense. It's just that we can't decide, right? So the Huxleyan agnostic is someone that says that the question is epistemologically blocked to us. The answer is epistemologically inaccessible to everybody. No one can ever rationally affirm that there's a God or not. Anyone who affirms that there's a God or that there isn't a God is being irrational. That's the Huxleyan position. The Huxleyan position is not just a position that they can't decide, but they can't decide because it's undecidable in principle. Okay, that's another position that you could take with respect to it. That's not a person who affirms that it's true or false. That's a person who's saying, no, you have to suspend judgment, and you're an imbecile if you do anything else, right? Then there's the fence sitter agnostic who thinks that the question is not only is the question does it have to be true or false, but the question is answerable. It's not like the Huxleyan position who thinks it's unanswerable. They think it's answerable. It's just that they think, well, I don't know what the answer is, so I'm not going to answer it, right? And it's not any cowardice or anything like that on their part. They just think, I can't make up my mind whether it's true or false, and I'm not going to pretend that my mind is made up one way or the other, even a little bit. I am literally on the fence. Right?
But you can still have beliefs within your agnosticism.
What do you mean, beliefs within?
Like for instance, you can believe that the Abrahamic God isn't real.
Yes, you can believe in a certain God,
right?
False, for instance. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yes, exactly. You can think that's how I feel. That I'm an atheist, and I think, well, the Abrahamic gods, all those gods, those are all just junk. Those are all.
Yeah, and I think young creationist gods are bullshit. I've said that many times.
Deism, I think, is not so easy to refute, and so I won't go so far as to say it's an impossibility.
But the problem is that within this model, a local atheist is just an agnostic.
Well, have you read Russell's paper on this? It's quite good. Am I agnostic or atheist?
Bertrand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he makes the kind of similar arguments where, where he goes, he's going to be considered to be an atheist or agnostic. Now, I speak globally, right? I mean, you say you're agnostic on the proposition. You're saying that if the proposition that God exists or some God exists, at least one God exists in the universe, that's global.
But can you answer that though?
What?
That is under that model, isn't a local atheist an agnostic?
No, and local atheists would say that I don't believe that particular God exists. They've evaluated the proposition.
Right, but are they considered agnostic?
No, okay, first of all, agnostic is what you're doing is you're taking agnostic on the global proposition and you're making it
on global.
They would still be agnostic global. They'd be not agnostic on that specific proposition. If the proposition is Thor exists, and I say that proposition is false, I am not agnostic on P there.
Okay, well, what if they are global atheists, but they believe in the possible? Are they an atheist or an agnostic?
Atheist has nothing to do with gods are possible or not. We've already explained this.
Yeah. But
I think
some gods are possible, logically speaking. Okay?
Yeah.
God could
I'm
say
still
all
an
gods are
atheist
possible.
because I
That's
think
right.
they're false. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you just think that there are no gods,
That's a
you don't
different
have to think
proposition.
gods are impossibilities, right?
Right.
Right.
Well,
I think some gods are impossibilities.
and that's a
I'm
distinction.
atheist with respect to those, but there are also gods that I think are possibilities.
Yeah. Joaquin's got to go. I think.
Yes, I'm
Joaquin.
still an atheist with
I
respect to
just
those
want to ask
too.
you a question to Ozymandias. I wanted to ask you if you don't think that all that that there are gods that are impossible. If you think that it's possible that there could be a god, why take a position on it? Why not?
Why
be
not?
agnostic?
These are beliefs.
Because I think there are better reasons for thinking that those gods don't exist. That
Right.
probably it's more probable they don't exist than do.
Possible doesn't mean that you're saying with certainty they don't. You're taking a belief position.
Yeah,
You're
to say
saying,
that something is possible is not.
What leads you? What? But I'm
likely.
asking like as like on a personal level. Why personally do you believe that?
Because they're
it's
logically
more,
possible.
It's more likely that they're not
Wait.
existent than that they are.
I
Like
missed
if-
the question and you got interrupted. Could you just say that again?
Yeah, I'm saying I'm asking on a personal level why you think it's more likely that those possible gods don't exist than that they do, because I would give it a 50-50 chance, because if it's possible, I don't know anything outside of my senses, so I just restrain my judgment. Why do you make a judgment on something that that you don't know if it's possible,
Because I don't have to know something. Because I don't have to know something to have a good reason to think that something is false.
Right.
Right. I don't have to know. I don't have to be able to demonstrate the impossibility of something for thinking that something.
What is the reason? Is what I'm asking.
Okay. Yeah.
I understand.
Well,
if you have go ahead.
Yeah, it just depends on which gods we're talking about. So for the Abrahamic faiths, for instance, I think those gods are falsified. Those gods, as defined, make no sense, right? They make predictions about the world, based on the stories in the Bible, and we dig around, and how about that? Some of them are falsified. How about that? There was no Exodus. How about that? There was no global flood. How about that? So and on and on, right? So those gods defined in terms of those stories, they don't exist. Okay, right. So you have to sort of scale down what those gods are, right? But then you've got, well, what about the god of the philosophers, right? When you get into sort of these gods that have all these omni attributes and stuff like that. Well, a lot of those omni attributes are inconsistent with one another, right? So they're logically impossible. So poof, those gods disappear in a puff of contradiction, right? So those disappear, right? But then you have yet more rarefied gods, right? Deistic conceptions of God, right? But what's wrong with those? Well, the problem with those is there's an infinity of them. I can keep multiplying an infinity of these gods. And I don't have any principled reason for thinking that any one of them is true. They are all just bare possibilities like Russell's teapot. But I can't accept one without accepting all of them, because they're all equally improbable, which is to say they're all equally probable, which is, negligibly probable, right? I'd have to bloat my ontology to include all of these gods, and some of them would be inconsistent with one another, right? So I have a reason for thinking that I have to reject all of them, because I have no reason to accept all of them, except that wouldn't apply to all of them. So to accept one would entail that I'm committed to accepting all of them, but they're
I don't understand that. Why is it that if you accept one, you have to accept all? I don't understand that part.
Oh, no, because if I were to accept one, I'd have to accept the next deistic conception, because they're equally plausible, right? That is to say, they're bare possibilities like Russell's teapot.
If you're willing to accept one bare possibility of that nature, then what would be exclusionary towards some other deistic concept that's almost exactly like? If I say, like, for example, God created the universe because he loved the beauty of it, call that an aesthetic God, or aesthetic deity, right? If that God exists, is a possibility, right? It's logically possible. There's nothing illogical about that. But if I accept,
why not withhold judgment?
Well, hang on. I can get to that. There's a couple of reasons. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. Okay, so just by way of analogy, think of Russell's teapot. Do I have a reason for thinking that Russell's teapot exists, right? Well, I don't have a reason for thinking that it exists, but I don't have a demonstration that it's false, right? Now, what reason might I have for thinking that it exists is that, well, it's a logical possibility. It's a bare possibility. It's not an impossibility. There's a teapot in orbit between Mars and Jupiter. That's not impossible. It could be. I can't demonstrate that it's not true, okay? But it's just as likely that Russell's gravy boat is floating around out there, right? And cup and saucer and the entire China shop is out there, right? The number of logically possible deities of a deistic sort that exist is literally infinite, right? And So I can't accept one unless I would accept all of them.
Mhm.
I would have to blow up my ontology. It would be absolutely arbitrary for me to affirm the existence of one of them over any of them. So I don't. I'm not going to affirm the existence of any one of them. I would need reasons. I'd need evidence. Well, that's precisely what's wrong.
Why not withhold judgment on it?
Well, I am. No,
Explained it.
I just.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Because there's no justification to withhold judgment on it.
There's no reason to
it really
withhold
isn't.
judgment. You see, the idea is if I accept one, I'd have to accept all. They're all equally implausible, just as Russell's teapot. Like, why don't you withhold judgment on Russell's teapot?
I mean, that's a good argument. I mean, it really is.
But it gets worse than that, and that is this. I know something about humans and what they get up to. Okay, let me construct a parallel argument here, if you'll indulge me for a moment. Think about Bigfoot. We've got Bigfoot, we've got the Loch Ness Monster, and we've got the Chupacabra, and we've got Yetis, and we've got dragons and sylphs, and innumerable sea monsters, and mermen and mermaids, and hydras and manticores, and on and on and on and on. The number of critters that people will invent, okay, is limited only by the fecundity of our imagination. There are literally millions of such critters, elks and fairies and spirits that we have made up. When it comes to cryptozoology and little creatures that go bump in the night, okay, one thing that we know is this, and it's because we know something. It's an independent background belief and understanding that we have about human nature. We make crap up. And one of the kinds of things that we love to make up are deities, creators. We make them up. These are beings of the imagination that are born of our epistemic hunger for explanations for questions of ultimacy, of how we arose here and things like that, right? We've invented hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of these kinds of deities. Deistic conceptions of God seem to me to be exactly the same thing. They're no different than Zeus. They're born of our epistemic hunger, right? Our desire, right? So right then and there, I have a reason to think, wait a minute, this smells like bullshit. This smells exactly like Zeus. This sounds confabulated. And here's a reason why I think it's confabulated, why these are just made up. Not only do I know that we do make these things up, and so the chances are this too is made up, right? If I just have to base things on probability, these deistic gods are also made up. But the other thing is this: there's nothing about any god that has ever been discovered. Everything you can say about a god, what it has done, what its nature is, what its attributes are, its omni-attributes, what it's likely to do, what its superpowers are, everything that anyone has ever said about any god is stipulated. It is simply decreed to be a property of that God. Nothing is discovered. There's no there when it comes to gods, right? It's not like positing planet X that is perturbing the orbit of Neptune, and therefore it makes sense to posit the planet Pluto, that there's a body out there that's planet-like, that's perturbing the orbit and causing the eccentricity in the orbit of Neptune, right? This is not analogous, right? Because we know about rocky bodies in space and how they exert gravitational influence and can perturb orbits and explain the eccentricity of an orbit and stuff like that.
And actually its orbit.
Yeah, in its specific location and its size and its distance and its orbital trajectory, which is in fact how we actually discovered Pluto.
Even its mass and its composition.
But this is one of the same arguments I tell atheists to use to justify their atheism.
Right. So just to finish it up here, this positing of something as an explanation, okay, makes sense as an inference to the best explanation when the thing that you're positing belongs to a class of entities that we know independently exists, or that these properties at least exist. But omnipotence is not a property we know exists. Right? Omnibenevolence is not a property we know exists. What is omnipotence and omnibenevolence and omniscience and all that? What are all the being atemporal and all that? What are these things? All of these things is simply an extension, an abstraction, and an elaboration of an existing concept. We know what it means to be powerful. Some people are more powerful than others. We know what it's like to know more. Some people know more than others, right? And you can just imagine more knowledge, more power, right? Living longer, eternally.
It's a desire for purity in every form.
Right. It's like, look, a Euclidean flat plane is an idealization. It is the absolute limit of flatness. I can witness and experience flatness, the flatness of my table, the flatness of my floor. And I can just keep imagining it being flatter and flatter, absolutely featureless, extending infinitely in two directions along the X and Y axis, but not in the third axis, right? Having no elevation at all. Two-dimensionality, right? The idea of an absolute geometric Euclidean plane, that is an idealization not to be found in the world. It's just an idea. It's at least a clear and distinct idea, okay? But concepts like omnipotence, theists debate what it means for God to be omnipotent. You know, can he violate the rules of logic, for instance? Can he change the laws of physics or not? Omnibenevolence, does that mean that he can permit evil, or would an omnibenevolent being not permit evil? All of these predicates, you know, omnibenevolence and omnipotence and being eternal and so forth, we don't know what those mean, because those are just extrapolations of mundane uses of words like, you know, time and space and good and bad and knowing and ignorant and powerful and powerless and so forth, right? They're all extrapolations, right? These are all limiting cases. Everything that is said about a God, everything that is said about a God is stipulation, not discovery.
And it's individual. And if you were to try to define it as discovery, it's only discovery by anecdotal revelation from one individual.
Right. Well, exactly. It's not actually discovered. What we have is someone is simply insisting that God revealed himself and that he has this attribute, but then, you know, whether or not that attribute actually exists is not.
And you can't even go ask God if that's the case. You can't even say, hey, do you have this attribute?
Right. So to round it about, to just finish my answer to Joachim here.
Okay.
So there's all these reasons. Gods, all of them, smell made up. They have every telltale sign of fiction, of invention, of being products of human imagination. And there's no evidence in favor of any one of them. They exist, like Russell's teapot, at best as logical possibilities, to the extent that they're even coherent. So that's why I don't believe in any of them. That's why I think they're all false.
Now, Joaquin, what he just said is the reasons I give to strong atheists or the weak atheists when they say, well, I don't have justification to be strong. Yeah, there is justification to be had if you want to use it. Now, his argument, which I've used before, is a very, very, very good argument. So I really get annoyed when an atheist tells me, well, you know, I believe there's no gods, but I have no justification for that kind of thing. You know, they just kind of just throw it out there. Gods are bullshit. Gods are all made up. And then you ask them kind of reasons. They don't really have a way of expressing why. Ozzy explained in great detail a very good reasons to have those justifications and to explain why he thinks that gods are made up.
So why is it that you would withhold judgment when he doesn't? Why are you agnostic, like, in light of those reasons?
Because a good argument doesn't necessarily mean convincing.
Exactly. That's number one.
Yeah.
No, but that begs the question: what don't you find convincing? What was
of course it does. Well, no, it doesn't beg the question; it raises the question. But
that's what I mean. No, but that's what it means. Okay, well, actually, beg the question gets. I mean, beg the question as it beggars the question.
Yeah, thank you. I know.
Yeah.
Pet peeve.
Beg the question means two things. It means it raises the question immediately, and it's also used.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
no, it is a great question. Again, before you came in, I was talking to Jim about personal anecdotal stuff, right? And I have to weigh that into the whole narrative of and I agree with you wholeheartedly when you start taking into account all these bare possibilities. Yeah, it's you can't just sit there and say, well, I could think any god can exist. If I'm going to posit any type of possible deity, it's going to be one that just is a creator being that is, instead of positing a brute fact as a universe. I mean, you're going to end up with a brute fact, circularity, or infinite regress at some point. And I don't think it's any more irrational to say, well, a being was doing this rather than a brute fact that we can't explain. I mean, so that's my position on it. It's not necessarily that I disagree in any way, shape, or form what you said. I agree. We have not discovered any properties of any deity. They've all been stipulative. But
why are we limiting the conversation to creator gods? Like, could there be a creator that is, or a god that
that's just
isn't
my
a creator?
personal thing.
Okay.
I wouldn't limit them to creator gods. I think Zeus-like beings, for instance, beings of immense.
I
Power.
don't think any of those exist.
Yeah, I don't think they exist either. But I mean, you can imagine beings of immense power, of like the Olympians, for instance, who didn't create physical reality around us, right? They are beings of physical
Ocean
reality.
believes them.
And yeah, he believes them. It's a little unclear what he believes, but not that he has.
I don't think he's even clear what he believes.
I'm just not very familiar with his views. So,
yeah.
You can imagine a being that is ontologically so different from everything else in the natural world that it properly belongs in its own ontological category, and that it doesn't make a lot of sense to just subsume it under the heading of the natural.
Right.
Imagine beings like, for instance, if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, in the Iliad, for instance, there's a scene where Zeus and Hera, who've taken sides in the war, end up having sex because Hera doesn't want Zeus to side with, I can't remember if he's with the Trojans or the Greeks, but anyway, they're on opposite sides of those two. And so she, in order to ensure the victory of her side down on Earth, she distracts Zeus by seducing him and bringing him into the bedroom, and they have sex. And while they're making love on Earth, that is, while they're making love on Olympus, meanwhile, back on Earth, all of the crops bloom, and organisms become pregnant, and like they're having sex has this sort of sympathetic effect in the rest of the physical world where everything else springs to life. Right.
There's the opposite story with Persepolis and Hades, where Persepolis descends into the underworld. And, and because she's in the underworld, the plants cease to grow. Remember that story?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of sympathetic magic and stuff like that. Now, if beings existed like that, right, that flew in the face of our existing physical laws and conservation of mass and energy and stuff like that. If beings existed that had these sorts of powers and causal powers, if they had sovereignty and dominion over the forces of nature and stuff like that, I think it would make perfect sense to call them gods and think of them as supernatural. It's just that I don't think that there's any reason to think that they exist. And again, they smack of human invention. They seem to me as possible.
Right.
Could there be some sort of like other universe with different properties where there's some sort of being that doesn't bear any sort of connection to mankind's creative stories?
It would be possible.
Exist?
Well, there's two hypotheses I could entertain.
Unlikely in your mind. I mean, like, because you couldn't apply the argument about it looking like something made up by humans, since it doesn't bear those properties, right?
Well, I mean, it does. You just invented one, for instance. You just said, imagine the following. Imagine a being that, exists in some other dimension. What other dimension? It's just something you've just made up there. And it has whatever properties you would get to specify them. Again, that would be like literally an act of you inventing a god for the purposes of a philosophical point that you're making, right? So that would certainly smack of invention. But here's a difficulty. Here's another objection. Okay, it has to do with unfalsifiability. If you posit a being that is so alien, it's outside of our causal structure, right? It doesn't interact with us in any way. It exists again as a mere logical possibility. What would I expect to find in the way of evidence, right? How would the world be different, right? Would the world be different, right? This is a problem I have with most theistic conceptions, actually, is that they posit a God that created this world. This God has an intelligence, it has a mind, it may or may not have concern for its creation. It may be watching it like looking into the fishbowl at us or something like that, or it might not be, it might be completely unconcerned, it might not even exist anymore, it might have sort of winked itself out of existence or something like that. But the idea is that the world around us is an artifact created by some kind of incredibly powerful intelligence that brought everything into existence, okay? The problem with that deity, right, and the deists believe that their God concepts have to be rational. You're not a deist if you believe only on faith. That's fideism. That's not deism. Deism is the view that these gods can be rationally justified using things like teleological arguments or cosmological arguments and so forth. Right? Now, the problem is that these gods have what powers do they have? Well, these gods, whenever they're positive, these deities, I'll call them, they have whatever powers it would take to create the universe. In other words, they have universe creating powers, but those are not specified. Who knows what those are, right? And are there universes that they can and can't create? Is there a limit to what they could create? Right. So here's a way of sort of understanding what's wrong with this hypothesis. When people want to posit it, imagine that a person believes that there's such a God. Just ask them, supposing reality looked very different, supposing the laws of physics were different, supposing that the universe was populated with different kinds of things, not galaxies and stuff like that, but other kinds of things, not organisms like us, but different kinds of organisms, maybe bodiless, unembodied minds or something like that, right? Reality could be completely different. Whatever reality was like, you could always posit that something with universe creating powers created that universe, right? But that's just to show the vacuity, the emptiness of that as an explanation. It's a pseudo explanation because it doesn't explain anything about this world. It doesn't explain anything in particular. It just says, whatever there is would have to have an explanation, and I'm positing something that has whatever unspecified properties would be necessary to explain it. And I never specify what those properties are that would do the explaining. That's not an explanation. So
do you feel
that's unfalsifiable. In other words, there's no way to connect the artifact, the world, right, the alleged creation, and trace it back to the creator, because the creator has no specific properties that could work as telltale signs of its manufacture, right? So that's why I would reject those gods. Those gods are so thin, so anemic, they predict nothing about what we find. They predict how every world could be, right? Not how this world is. And so there's no way to trace anything in this world back to the nature and properties of that God. They are pseudo explanations. And so that's the only reason to believe them is to the extent that they provide an inference to the best explanation, to the extent that they are posits, they're hypothetical beings that, if they existed and have these particular properties, it would explain the features that we see. But they don't have. That's precisely what's missing. They are so thin and anemic that they predict nothing. They generate no predictive expectations about what we should find in the world, what we should not find in the world. Right?
Don't explain much either. Right? It reminds me of the argument from contingency.
Right. Yeah. They explain nothing as a result. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't subscribe to the PSR for other reasons, but even with the PSR, it doesn't really explain anything just by positing a D. It doesn't get you out of any kind of philosophical quandary. You're always going to be wondering, if not Jesus, I mean, if God existed, or some kind of creator God existed and he created, then you have to ask yourself, okay, why did he create this world? How did he do it? It doesn't really answer anything by positing it. It actually provides more questions, but it doesn't answer the question, why did he create this world out of all others? Was it a metaphysical necessity for him to do so? I mean, if he's a metaphysical necessity, right, if you're going to ground it in that, because you have to end up either in a causal chain that goes back either as an infinite regress or some kind of a contingent thing that existed that from all things contingent flowed, or as a metaphysical necessity from which all things contingent flowed. If you do that, then you still have to posit, why did he create this particular world? It doesn't answer any questions of why this universe exists, because you don't know. If he had to create this world, there's a problem, because then he loses, some of his sovereignty and omnipotence, because he's beholden to some reason why he had to create this world. And if he just created this world arbitrarily, then it's by pure chance, and that seems kind of capricious to me.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely like a trend throughout history that people have used, like plugged God into every question. And like we've been eliminating God as the answer over and over and over again. And if that trend, were to continue, God would be, unplugged from every hole. Like, I mean, Jim, you're muted. So are you, Ozzy?
I can unmute Jim.
Okay, sorry. And I was just saying, like, I mean, this is exactly how. Well, I mean, this is exactly what I said in the very beginning of the stream. I mean, it's just the God of the gaps, and it can be demonstrated as such.
I wouldn't go so far to call it God of the gaps unless you're positing it as a God of the gaps, right? God of the gaps means you're literally saying we don't have a scientific explanation for something, ergo God. And I don't necessarily think that all theists do that.
I think that
Some do.
okay, so theists don't do that, but the development of the religions do.
Possibly.
No, it's not possible. It is demonstrable.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're saying we don't have an explanation for this, it must be that Thor did it. Then yeah, that's clearly a God of the gaps. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, specifically, that's an argument from ignorance, right? If it,
The God of the gaps is an argument from ignorance, is it not?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a species of argument from ignorance.
Yeah.
It's just whether or not that ignorance is willful. Like if that knowledge is out there and they're just willfully ignoring it and plugging this God in. I mean, willful ignorance and ignorance are very different. And that's not to say that the religion that person is a part of did not come from somebody being ignorant, not willfully.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think these are all good arguments. I think the case is going to be more along the lines of, are they convincing enough to convert somebody from a weak case to a strong case? Well, that's up to the individual if they think it's convincing enough. They're definitely good arguments, right. And so that's what needs to be promoted. That if people want to be getting into atheism, these are the arguments that should be used against theists. These are the arguments that should be used against agnostics. These are the arguments that you use against weak atheists. Don't fall into the tribalism. Don't just rest on your laurels and say, "Oh, I don't believe there's a God. I'm a weak atheist." Have somebody challenge you on that. Well, why aren't you a strong atheist? Just like they challenged me in here about being agnostic. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, like the reason I'm like I describe myself as a provisional atheist. What that means is I recognize that my reasoning might be wrong. Some better argument could come along tomorrow that upsets the apple cart and makes me think, oh, how about that? Maybe I ought to be agnostic about this particular conception of God. And then a further argument could come along and make me think, yeah, how about that? I think that's a good argument that God exists. That could happen. I don't think it's very likely at this stage of my life. But I mean, it's not impossible. And so I think one has to sort of be, open-minded and willing to entertain the arguments and not assume that any argument that's put on the table has to be mistaken, right? That's just a kind of narrow-mindedness. But to say that I think that there aren't any gods, just to bang home a point that we were talking about earlier, is not to say that I think I can demonstrate the impossibility of any and all gods. You don't have to be, I mean, that would be a burden that I wouldn't want to take on, right? That's a kind of like, super duper atheist who thinks that any and all
claim, unless you think you can. If you made the claim they're all impossible, then that's your burden.
Right. Yes, and I have actually heard a few atheists go so far as to say that.
Yeah, I think that's this. There's no way they can meet that burden.
Yeah, I don't think
they don't even know how to make a logical argument, and they're going to be doing reductio ad absurdum without knowing logic. It's not going to happen.
They can meet it to meet their own justification, but
I don't think they can. I don't think they can rationally
convince very many people.
No, I think they're irrational if that's the case.
When it comes to like. When it comes to burden of justification, the concept of burden of justification, as I understand it, the concept of a burden of evidence or burden of proof, I use all those terms interchangeably. I just prefer using burden of justification because it reminds people that the point of this burden is that you're supposed to show how your argument or how your position, your conclusion is rational. You don't have to prove it to a geometric certainty, right? But people hear the expression burden of proof and then they just wet themselves because they know I can't prove it like a geometric proof, right? And then then they want to run away from the concept of burden of proof and say, I don't have a burden of proof at all. Well, look, you can have a burden of proof,
right.
But a burden of proof just means a burden of rational justification, right? Of having some warrant, right? But not any old warrant. It's only warrant if it's rational, right? If you have bad arguments, then you haven't discharged your burden. You might think you've discharged your burden. It's possible, for instance, like someone could come along and say, Ozzy, actually, you haven't discharged your burden as you were trying to do there when you were answering Joaquim's questions. You didn't discharge your burden because you committed this fallacy and that fallacy, and there was some inferential leaks here and there and stuff like that. So while you think you've you've met your burden, you in fact haven't, right? That you know, that could be, right? One can be challenged on these things, right? So, but the concept of burden of justification isn't that you just think, oh, I'm satisfied, I've got a justification. No, it has to be the case that you in fact have good arguments, right? It's a normative concept, right? Burden of justification is a normative concept, right? The idea is that you have an epistemological responsibility to arrive at your beliefs in a way that is consistent with the norms of rational discourse.
Yes.
If you just have stupid reasons,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that you find convincing.
Yeah, Jim. If I said, hey
Or
Jim, if I said Jim, I'm gonna make a decision. Flip a coin, X, Y, that, right? If I flip a coin on something, is that rational justification? Of course not, right? So just because you have a reason doesn't mean it's a rational reason. So if somebody says, I believe that I can show that all gods are logically impossible, and you don't use logic to do it, then that's irrational because you're making a claim that they are illogical. That requires some kind of proof to demonstrate that.
Right.
You know, so again, just having a reason does not make it rational.
A lot of people use logic and reason interchangeably.
That's true, but I do differentiate the two. But I mean, they're obviously overlap, and people can use them interchangeably in regards. I do separate the two, but when you're making an argument that they're logically impossible, I don't take that to mean as they're just not reasonable. I mean to take that very specifically that you're saying like square circle, that the logically impossible.
Well, I mean to that extreme.
Yes. That's how I take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I got a question. So I'm hearing that there's like a lot of justifications on, you know, like I guess the people that don't believe. Like, have you guys have heard any like good justifications on the theistic side? Like, you might disagree fundamentally, but you'll be like, oh, that's, you know, maybe that's possible or whatever. Like,
well, they're possible, but I mean, like, I gotta say this. Like, for example, like arguments years ago would have been a lot more convincing than they are now. Like Aquinas's 5 ways. To people living back when 1,000 years ago, they would have been very convincing arguments because they didn't understand physics the way we do now. So, like the argument for motion, you know, we understand that quantum mechanics screws a lot of crap up. And well, I mean, it would have been a convincing argument.
The fact that there is still so much debate and dispute over these positions, I mean, just lends credence to the answer. I mean that yeah, it's well,
that's one of the arguments I use. I mean, the mere fact that if so many billions of people believe at least something's out there, it's hard to hand wave that away. It's very different. Now, granted, they don't believe the same thing, but there is something to be said. You don't see 1 billion, 2 billion, 4 billion people, whatever, believing that leprechauns exist, right? You don't see 4 billion people believing that fairies exist. For some reason, there's this ubiquitous thing in society that a lot of people believe in something they call a god. Now, what it is, who knows? Why? It could be human nature. It could be all biological. That's a good argument for that.
I think,
it's hard to hand wave it away.
I think a lot of it, though, being around a lot of believers, I feel like maybe people experience some spiritual experiences, and so they might point it to justification for the reason why that they believe. Because I know like a lot of normal believers, they're not sitting around like engaging in philosophical discussions every day, or you know what I'm saying. So
no, I definitely see that.
Why, and what you would have to do is you would have to kind of like really tweak and see like if you could get them to understand that maybe it's possible that it's not that way. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you experience something that, I guess, some chemical in your brain or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Because I've heard people are delusional.
But that's why we talk about these things. That's why we have these conversations. And this is why, and I do got to wrap this up. But this is why I get very frustrated when people come, and I don't even know half the people leaving comments on this one video. I know a lot of people, but the people leaving comments clearly have never really looked much into this. They haven't really had any deep pondering of these things. And yet they're just claiming that I am just being dishonest, that I am misrepresenting things, that I'm straw manning, which I don't think they know the meaning of half those things. But it's very frustrating because I talk to a lot of intelligent academic people, and we have fun sussing these things out. I don't sit around and going, hey, Ozzy, I disagree with you, therefore you're an idiot. Right? Ozzy, I disagree with you, therefore, you you're purposely straw manning me. No, he would never go out of his way to straw man me. But I see it all the time.
But Joaquin's wearing red headphones.
Well, and he's an idiot.
We all know what that means.
Yeah, but see the difference is because when you have somebody that you obviously respect, but you're obviously talking on a topic that you both enjoy, there is no charges of dishonesty there, right? Because he would never willfully just have an argument to be a straw man. What would be the point? He wants to come to, in a dialectic, he wants to come to a conclusion with something. He wants to have a reason for something. He wants the opponent to have a reason for something. But all these people leaving messages saying, well, Steve, you're just being dishonest. It just blows my mind, because I'm not the only person out there saying these things. People that are much more well-educated than I am say the exact same things for the same reasons, only more articulately, but that's fine. But to say that I'm dishonest because I'm putting forth a different narrative than your favorite YouTube star, that's what I'm talking about tribalism, groupthink, and dogma. And I think that the majority of the newer atheists out there are recognizing that, and that they want to see that stop. Because I am not putting anything that's that contentious among people that actually understand these topics.
I think you're great, Steve. I really appreciate your program, man, and I've enjoyed talking to you, Jim. I've really appreciated some of the debates that you've done, as well as you, Ozymandias. I've enjoyed listening to you debate. You guys have really given me so many hours of entertainment. So I love you guys.
We love
I really
that.
appreciate
And we hope that we do.
I've learned a lot from you guys, and thank you so much for coming online and doing what you do. I really appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, man. No, that means a lot. And Jim, don't forget to thank Jim too, because Jim's relatively new to the scene, but he's taking a huge responsibility on his shoulders for a lot of things. Trust me.
It's nice to meet you, Jim.
Thank you. It's really nice to meet you too, and that really means a lot. I mean, I think I speak for all of us when I say that's why we're here. I mean,
yeah. And Jim's the same way. Jim would never straw man me on purpose. When we first started having these discussions, we didn't agree upon a number of things, but we modified each other's positions. But I knew he was an honest interlocutor, and that's what I'm looking for. I want people that are honest interlocutors, and I'm not finding that for simple people that are coming to my page and just spewing outright bullshit because that's what they've been told by watching Atheist Experience. That's not being an honest interlocutor. People say, well, you're wrong. Okay, that's fine. First of all, nobody's ever been timed out for saying that I'm wrong. Nobody's ever been blocked for saying that I'm wrong. Ever. That's not how it works. It's the trolls that have no reasoning for saying what they say, and all they want to do is cause contention. There's no use in my life for those people. There's no use in a conversation for those types of people. Say you're wrong all you want, but give reasons. Right. That's all I ask. Give reasons. Not one person has said that the way we're showing the propositional logic to be is wrong. Not one has showed it. Not one. And yet and then when they do start using logic, I don't even understand what they're saying. It's in this weirdly obscure stipulative type of use of language. Have you heard of Wittgenstein's private language argument? Jim, a bit on the box.
Not right.
Okay, it's basically in a nutshell. There's no use for a private language. And so when people make these logics out there using their own terminology without a legend of any kind or anything like that, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. And they think they're defeating my argument. I'm like, can't you just do something kind of a little bit standard, even if I can't read it? Because I'm not that familiar with formal logic. I can find somebody who does, and we can go over it. That's why logics are generally kind of standardized in that regard.
I wanted to point out, Steve, I think the main thing with, especially the people that I see you interact with on Twitter, right? I think the main thing is that with them, I think you might threaten some of them, like in the sense, like you're offering a different position. People get so confident in what they believe, so it's like they set right out from the jump to really attack you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it all the time.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm willing to be proven wrong. I hate the narrative Steve won't admit he's wrong. I've been wrong about a number of things. I'm still to this day am depressed that I was wrong about snowballs and sublimation. Okay. I'll never get over that. But what the fuck? It is what it is, right? Something that I should have known about. I fucked up. Okay. Look, if you don't change a position at least once a year, then I don't think you really have any kind of reasons to be in discussion. You got to change something every so often, right? And we all modify our beliefs. That's why we live and learn. If somebody's willing to show that, there are only two positions out there, there's metaphysically by some impossibility to be any other position, I'm willing to entertain that. Go ahead. Do I think it's going to happen? No. because they know better. But if you want to give it a shot, sure. But it's just wrong to say that there's just two possibilities, theist or atheist. That is a false dichotomy to me. It's just making a dichotomy, making a disjunction, and say this is the way it has to be. And I take umbrage to that, because if you want to do that in your own communities, by all means. But the problem is when you do that and you don't explain to people the actual way it's taught or the actual or the reasons for these things, then when I say I'm agnostic and I'm not an atheist, and I have some idiot coming over saying, Steve, you can't be that, they don't understand the topic then. They just don't, because they're saying literally it could be no other way. And that's just grossly incorrect. So it is frustrating. I've been doing it for a lot of years. I know other people have as well. I just hope people keep listening, and they start pushback to these people. Start pushing back to this narrative. As a matter of fact, I don't think it causes a schism. I think it does the opposite. I think it builds a better atheist community.
Right. Yeah. I believe that educating people is important, but I also believe that we don't need to try to create diversion or tell people that they can't use the term atheist.
Nobody's ever done that, though.
I didn't say that they have. I'm just saying that's where I stand on it.
Yeah.
If I could just throw in final 2 cents here.
Sure.
My own view as someone who is an atheist and has a fair bit of sympathy for movement atheism. I mean, I'm considered an atheist YouTuber myself. I think if you want to reform people's ideas about atheists, and specifically destigmatize the word, what you have to do is get people to take the concept of atheism seriously. And people are not going to take it seriously as long as they think that atheists don't want to defend their atheism. So I think if you're an atheist, if you're like me and you think gods are made up, right, they don't exist, or at least there's no reason to think that there are, and there are better reasons to think that they don't exist, then take on the word atheist, wear it. And when someone asks you, why do you think there's no God? Tell them why you think there's no God. It's not that hard. I mean, a lot of atheists do it. It's really funny. One of the things I find most amusing is when I'll hear atheists discharging the burden of their atheism, and then in the next breath say that there's no burden of justification. And it's ridiculous. They really talk out of both sides of their mouths. So many atheists are actually quite good at defending their atheism. Matt Dillahunty, if you press him, will tell you he thinks there aren't any gods, and he has reasons for thinking there aren't any gods, and he'll give you those reasons. Right? He's not interested in doing that on the atheist experience, because
I don't follow him for that.
He's interested in challenging theists to defend their view and not shirk their burden of justification.
Yeah.
Don't you think the word will become destigmatized anyway as more and more people become atheists, as they learn more about science and the world?
Will they be taken seriously
online?
Right.
As
it grows,
but you have to realize what the initial implications are going to be for the atheist community if you encourage people to adopt atheism for the right reasons, quote unquote.
Yeah. When a theist looks at an atheist that has bad reasoning, right, and they say, "Oh, look at these atheists; they don't want to take a burden of justification," it doesn't do anybody any good. Right?
It does worse than that. It makes us look weak.
It does. It makes them look very, very weak.
It makes us commit the very fallacy that we find so obnoxious when theists burden shift.
Yes.
When two people are arguing about the question of God's existence, and one thinks that God doesn't exist and the other person thinks that God exists, there isn't one burden of justification in that room. There's two, right? There's no such thing as the burden of justification. There's the burden of justifying your position, whatever it is. Yes. And they have the burden of justifying their position, whatever it is. And if there's 10 people in the room with 10 different positions, there's 10 different burdens of justification.
And that is including not believing somebody.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to be made, is that whenever you're presenting ideas, you're not necessarily arguing against each other's ideas. You're just presenting your best justification for it, like the best evidence, or the most justifying evidence for you, and it is up to that person to, and the people watching, the people listening right now, to decide, which position was better represented, and which one was more convincing.
Yeah, no,
but the thing I was going to say, as a believer myself, like, since I am a believer, what I run into is I actually do justify, and then like with what it is, it's like on the other side, they're like, well, no, I don't have to, and that's what gets on my nerves. I don't mind.
Right, exactly. And
I
doesn't
don't
make them
mind
look
having two people
weak
that-
to
I
you,
mean,
Jay?
I don't mind someone disagreeing with me on my beliefs, but at least we need to hash out, you know, what we
Exactly.
believe, why we believe it, and
Can I,
everything. You know what I'm
can I
saying?
ask
Jay,
you
does that-
something, Jay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Whenever you're talking to people like this, are you arguing, or are they arguing against your God specifically? Like, whenever you're asking them this question, are you asking them, why don't you believe in my God, or are you asking them, why don't you believe in a God, period?
In a God, period.
Okay, see. So in my opinion, I feel like that is a dishonest tactic on your part, because you are defending your God, and then you're asking him to defend all gods. You know what I mean?
Well, if the atheist thinks there are no gods, then
Right.
that's
Well, yeah, right. Well, right. But that is not the proposition that the atheist is reacting to. The atheist is reacting to somebody who believes in I'm guessing the Abrahamic God of the Bible.
You don't defend a proposition you don't hold. So if I'm not a Christian, there's nothing about Christianity that requires a burden of justification with me. It's the Christian that has to justify his or her belief in Christianity. Yeah, but whereas if I think that the Christian God is made up along with all the others, then I need to explain why I think the Christian God is made up. And to the extent that the person is interested in why I think there are no other gods either,
Sure.
then I can defend that as well. But you might be only agnostic with respect to other gods and atheistic with respect to the Christian God, in which case that's the position you have to defend. You just have to defend what it is you think is the case.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying though, is why I would, wouldn't you think it would be more it would be more honest to approach it from, well, disprove my God first, and then you can disprove the others?
No, you don't have to sort of disprove any particular God. Like, I think there's a.
Well, I mean, not disprove. I'm sorry, but offer justification for your non-belief.
Yes, but let's imagine that. Let me sort of cash out a couple of scenarios here. Let's imagine that Jay, you're a Christian theist, is that correct, Jay?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, so imagine that Jay and I get into a conversation, okay, and at the start of the conversation, he starts, talking about his faith, or he starts, preaching to me, or, whatever.
Which I wouldn't do, by the way.
Okay, well, no, it'd be fine if you did when we get it, but let's say that you start saying something that obviously implies or necessitates that your God exists, or something like that, right? Maybe you refer to a miracle that you believe happened, or something like that. And we start talking about your faith, right? Now, we haven't talked about what my beliefs are at all. Now, if you put forward a statement and I think it's false, I have to have reasons for why I think it's false, okay? If I'm going to be reasonable, if I think it's false. But I don't even have to think that it's false to interrogate your position. It's a mistake for people to think that in order to interrogate a person on their beliefs, you have to believe the opposite, right? Because I could also be a Christian. I could be your child, hey, daddy, why do you believe in God, right? And you wouldn't say, well, geez, son, Ozzy, why do you doubt God exists? Maybe I don't have any such doubts, right?
Right.
So you don't even have to come from a position of doubting something to call it into question. Questioning and doubting are different things.
You might just be seeking clarification.
Right, exactly. I do it all the time. I talk to my fellow atheists. I think that there's no God. They think there's no God. I ask them, why do you think there's no God? Why? Because I want to know if they have good reasons for thinking that there's no God. Right? I've talked to so many atheists who have the worst or can't think of a single reason why there's no God. Or when they come up with reasons, sometimes they're terrible, right? And then I sort of think it's my responsibility to say, hey, let me help you up your game here a little bit. There are perfectly good reasons for thinking there isn't a God. Right, and a Christian can do that to a fellow Christian and say, wait a minute, I think your arguments for God, your proofs of God's existence are terrible here, Jay, let me help you with that, right? So I can do that as an atheist, right? So the fact that you challenge someone's conclusions and their arguments doesn't imply that you hold the opposite view, right? So you don't have to hold the opposite view. You can hold the same view as a person and still challenge them. And this is to simply say this: you take on a burden of justification, not because of a challenger, and not because a person holds the opposing view. You take on a burden of justification because you believe something to be the case. It's what you take to be the case that defines your burden of justification. And it's the degree of conviction that you have in it that dictates how much evidence you have and how good the quality of the reasons you have to be. If you believe something very guardedly, you don't need to have as good arguments as if you have full conviction in the indubitable truth of something, right?
Well, I disagree though, because
okay, wait, I just want to finish one point.
Okay, sure, I'm sorry.
And that is this: you don't need another person in the room to have a burden of justification, right? It's a condition of rationality on your part, right? That you should be able to discharge the reasons why you think something is the case.
And it's kind of funny is that
person in the room, and it doesn't matter if it's theism or atheism or agnosticism or Marxism or you name it.
The term I use is transportable, as a term that I just happen to like. I think that the burden of justification for why you believe something is transportable to other people, as to support your arguments to them. So if you're doing a burden of persuasion, right? If I want to convince you that I have the correct position or my position is better or whatever, the same reasoning why I've convinced myself is the same reason I'm going to give to you. So if you have a reason to believe something or not believe something, why not give it to somebody? It's completely transportable.
Right.
If their burden of proof has to match their, if the burden of proof has to match their confidence, then what does that do to Saichen Brudenkate's argument?
Well, you've seen
he's got a problem. He's got a problem.
Him.
He has convictions he does not know how to discharge rationally.
Right, and
all he does is burden shift. He hasn't a
Among
clue
other
how to defend his theology.
He is consistent, but he makes a lot of he does burden shift. There's no question about that.
His entire apologetic consists of a burden shift and trying to stump people with difficult philosophical questions which he can't answer himself, but which he thinks by invoking his God are automatically answered. That's
because God.
Yeah.
No, I've got him on a few things. I mean, I've seen him shut down a few times. I think Jim made him be quiet for like 10 seconds.
Literally 10 seconds.
Yeah.
10 full seconds.
I've shut him down too completely, where he was he didn't even want to answer the question. I'm like, okay, we're gonna have to move on here because like, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's positing a metaphysical necessity without reason to even posit a metaphysical necessity. It's like, what is your God that for some reason you think is the prerequisite condition for all intelligibility? Yeah, you're presupping that. Okay, great, but you have no reason to actually posit that. It's completely begging the question to say that God is the precondition for intelligibility because God is the precondition of intelligibility.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I like to do when I talk to presuppositionalists and they try to bring up this conditions of intelligibility is I always ask them, what exactly is it that needs explaining? What is it that's unintelligible?
Why you have knowledge?
Right. So what are these conditions?
How can you know something?
Conditions of intelligibility, right? And then tell me how your God, the existence of your God, answers that. And then I want to hear how you demonstrate that your God has those attributes that would solve those problems, right? Other than you just stipulate that God has a superpower necessary to explain such and such.
That's all it is. You just stipulate it. And yet it's funny because, like you said, when you ask him, why is it that an atheist can have knowledge? And he's like, well, you're just borrowing from my worldview. And it's like, but why? He never can answer a question about why he has to posit his specific deity over any other to have some kind of prerequisite for intelligibility.
That's because he doesn't have an account, right? He
has no account. He has no account.
He says he's got an account, but he's got a vacuous account, right?
But so what? I mean, even if I don't have a count of something, he doesn't either.
Right. Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't even know half the time what they even mean by an accounting anymore.
Well, an account is just an explanation.
Yeah. But the way they mean it.
What conditions would have to obtain for such and such to be the case? That's what he means by.
But they take things are so immutable. They take like laws of logic to be these immutable things in the universe. And you have to account for them. Well, only have to account for them is because these things are a priori. I mean, I could take them as a brute fact.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask these presuppositionalists is exactly what are the facts and features of logic that need to be explained? What are they? Right? Invariably, they don't know. And when they when they come up with something, it's something like, well, they're abstract, they're concepts. Says who? That is a particular theory of logic, right?
You be mathematical Platonists and think that they're real.
Yeah. I mean, there's
More
actually a whole
concrete
panoply of positions on this. It's not just Platonism.
Have any of you guys heard of? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to
say one
interrupt
quick
you,
question,
Steve.
and then you can ask. I was going to say, if you have something like the law of identity, if God did not exist, would it stop being the case?
Wait, what?
The law of identity. Would that stop being the case if there was no God? If God poofed out of existence, would that stop being something that holds true?
Right.
They can't answer that.
Yeah, it's true.
It's true regardless if there's a God or not. There's no reason to posit a deity for that. It's just it's an axiomatic statement.
Yeah, I agree.
Ozzy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, my own view is that what they call the laws of logic. Okay, well, first of all,
the principles of logic.
The things that they call the laws of logic, principle of excluded middle, principle of non-contradiction, principle of identity, and so forth. Those are assumptions of logic. Okay, they're not
one type of logic.
They're not. Yeah, and of a type of logic too. So those are in fact assumptions of logic. If you don't assume those things, the logic doesn't go anywhere. Those are principles. Those are assumptions that we make to make our sort of first order propositional logic, classical logic, run. You need to make those assumptions. But what they're really sort of interested in are the timeless verities, the truths of logic. But I forgot where I was going with this.
Well, now. but there's logics that don't even use this truth gap and truth gluts and other things that don't usually.
Yeah. I mean,
they're just assuming that all logics are created equal, and again, you bring them to that attention, and they're just like they go lose their minds or something. Yeah.
Well, a difficulty is that there's an obvious position here that they never entertain, which is it's the old Aristotelian position, which is that there's no accounting for or explaining logic. There's no other way that reality could be other than logical, right? If it's not like, when they talk about laws of logic, they're using the word laws because they're thinking of it like laws of physics. They love that expression, laws of logic, right? They don't say principles of logic or the assumptions of logic or the axioms of logic. They always talk about laws of logic, right? Or the logical absolutes. They think of these things on analogy with laws of physics. And that's because they think God is the great architect of reality. He created physical reality. And so if there are physical laws like E equals mc squared and F equals ma and the gas laws and the pressure laws and so forth, those were laid down by God, right? These are the blueprint. These are sort of formal mathematical descriptions of regularities that describe how God set up the world. Okay, and they sort of imagine that the laws of logic are like that. Like, how do you explain why the laws of logic are how they are, right? But you have to ask them, well, wait a minute, how else could they be, right? I can imagine different physical laws, different physical constants, right? Physics could have turned out differently, right, than we discovered it to turn out, right? If the laws of physics were different, the laws of physics we would have discovered would have been different. But the so-called laws of logic that they see as timeless and immutable, the so-called verities of logic, those can't be otherwise, can they? Do you think they could be otherwise? Do you think God could have created an illogical world? A world that violated the principle of non-contradiction? No, they don't think that, right? So in other words, there's no other way God could have created the world. And that's because in part, logic isn't even about this world. Logic doesn't just describe this world. I think of logic, think of a truth table. Think of truth tables, a truth table for and or and if then and so forth, right? It's all sort of listed in terms of possible worlds. Logic isn't just about the world. It's about the possible. It's about the non-actual, but that is still possible. It's the set of all logical spaces, right? Think about logical validity, okay? If I say the following, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, well that's logically valid and it's sound. Okay, but consider the following, which is also logically valid. If the moon is made of green cheese, then people are pencils. The moon is made of green cheese, therefore people are pencils. That's logically valid too. That is strictly logically valid. It's completely unsound. It doesn't refer to anything in the world. The moon is not made out of green cheese. People are not pencils. And yet it's true that if the moon is made of green cheese, then people would be pencils. The moon is made of green cheese, therefore people are pencils.
And actually,
that's absolutely valid. That's absolutely valid. Now, so what's going on there? What's going on there is that logic isn't just about the world. It's not like physics. It's not a description of physical reality. Logic describes all possible space, right?
You know, this.
The
did you ever
physical
hear the
world.
debate?
Oh, just
I'm
wait,
sorry.
one last point. Yeah, I just want to finish one last point if I could. So the punchline here is this: the reason the rules of logic, or the laws of logic, or the assumptions of logic and the inference rules of logic and all that preserve the validity. The reason they apply to the world is because they apply to every possible world, including the actual one, which is just one of many possible worlds, right? That's why logic always abides and always obtains, right? That would be one way that you could answer that question. There's no mystery about how logic applies to the world. If the world were completely different, it would apply to that world too. The same logic would apply to that world too. So that's one way of sort of
an interesting side on that, Ozzy, that whole all men are mortal, Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates man. Interesting thing on that we're gonna have a hangout on. That's valid in predicate logic, but in sentinel logic, it's actually not valid because it goes from PQ to R. I have a thing that I was working on, something to explain that to somebody, that in different forms of logic, depending on if you zoomed in or zoomed out, makes a difference. Because if you look at the actual predicate, the propositional form, these are distinct three atomic sentences, and there's no connectives between the three. So it really depends on which form you're using. I find that kind of stuff interesting, right? So when people talk about logic, even in different types of logic, things are different. Whether you're using propositional or predicate.
Yeah. Well, that's because, like in sentential logic, you can't break down predicates. You can't separate predicates and stuff like that. So
I find that to be fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. Like a lot of people think certain things are valid that are not valid. Like consider the following inference. If I say Sam is a bachelor, and then if I say therefore Sam has no wife. I mean, raise your hand if you think that's valid, a valid argument.
Wait, say it one more time.
Sam is a bachelor, therefore Sam has no wife. Is that valid?
Sam could be a female, could be married to a husband.
Yes, that's valid.
Okay, well, let's assume Sam is male. Let's use Tyrone is a bachelor, therefore Tyrone has no wife. It doesn't matter what you.
Yeah, I'll by analytical definition, all unmarried men are bachelors. Okay,
but is it valid? Is it logically valid? Well, it's not actually.
Well, there's no what's the rule of inference?
That's right, because there's no context, there's no connection.
Exactly,
there's no rule of inference.
That's right. There's no inference there, right?
Yeah.
That what I just said. Sam is a bachelor, therefore Sam has no wife, is logically of the same form as Sam is a welder, therefore Sam has no pants, right? That's invalid too. They're both invalid, right? The reason,
they call it ethymine. Is that ethymine?
Yeah. The reason it strikes a person as being valid is because we understand that a bachelor is an unmarried man. So there's a hidden premise. What we're really arguing is Sam is a bachelor, therefore Sam is an unmarried man, therefore Sam has no wife.
Yeah.
Right. An unmarried man has no wife, right? And that's what we're doing there. So there's a bridge principle that's in there that's implicit, because we understand that bachelor means unmarried male, and therefore he can't have a wife, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
But just those two sentences, Sam is a bachelor, Sam has no wife, one doesn't follow from the other.
Well, how about this one? P, therefore P, that is logically valid and strongly deductive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I love that one.
Question, assuming your conclusion is actually valid, right?
That's a strong argument, actually. It's just
that's right. It's never the case that you can say P, therefore not P.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I love that kind of stuff. I find those kind of trivialities interesting.
Yeah, well, that's another thing actually. So P, therefore P is an example of something that is valid and fallacious. Because it's fallacious to use a P, therefore P in an argument, right?
But logically, it's constructed fine. It's validly deductive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's certainly true that if P is the case, that therefore P is the case, right?
Yeah. No, like I said, I find these things to be fascinating, but I do got to wrap. Ozzy, thanks.
Yeah.
I know it's been a while, and you've been here for, oh my God, it's been a few hours. So I hope there's some takeaway from some of this stuff. I love having these discussions. We do have them often. I know we kind of get repetitive, but I think there's a lot of things that you'll talk about. But I hope people get on board and when these people start saying things like, the people that are putting forth a different narrative are automatically being wrong or dishonest, ask them why. I have yet to have any real substantive conversation with anybody that thinks I'm wrong. And I'm more than willing to. I've opened it up many times. Come on in. Joaquin came in, challenged. We hope we addressed his stuff. I'm not against that. But I will not deal with people that just by fiat say that somebody's wrong or just wants to be a troll rather than have actual conversation. I want to go on Modern Day Debates channel. In fact, Jim could even probably moderate. And I'll debate anybody on this particular topic. This is one topic that I'm comfortable debating on. I feel confident on it. Or 1 equals 0.9, I'm repeating. I'll debate anybody on that one too, because I'm pretty confident on that one. But I only want to debate things I'm confident on. I don't know. I love debating, don't get me wrong, but if I'm going to debate something again, because the first two, I destroyed my opponent. I want to have a third one that I destroy somebody. So I'm feeling pretty good that these are two topics I can do pretty well on. So if anyone wants to challenge me, I'm open for it. Sound good? Any last words? Any kind of? And by the way, like I said, thanks, Jim, for putting forth a different narrative as well. I mean, you've got a pretty significant position in the atheist community. People are listening to you, and people are noticing that your debating skills are just going to be on par and with anybody else that has been in this for a long time. I think you're a natural at this.
Thank you.
The fact that you're willing to learn, and I've seen things that you've changed in the last couple of months, and you've changed other people's positions. That's what effective dialogue is. And if that's the kind of atheist community that's going to be promoted, then yeah, I'm on board with that. I love that type of atheist community. I hope that more atheists can start being like that, because I do know atheists in the community, they just by fiat say you're wrong and I'm wrong and anybody else is wrong. They don't care about the argument. They just straight up say, well, yeah, you know what? Steve's an idiot. Steve's wrong. Okay, great. Come show me. That's all I ask.
Yeah.
So, all right. With that, guys, good night. We are going to be doing debate roulette tonight.
Ooh, what is that?
You haven't seen debate roulette?
No.
Oh, dude.
How do I not know about debate roulette?
I don't know. We actually, we're actually redoing the whole thing, but we haven't perfected it yet. So that not
Sometimes
this one, the
they're
next one.
terrible. Sometimes they're awful. Sometimes they're great.
You know what? I gotta tell you, I haven't really seen a horrible one yet, though. The people that come in and they're unprepared makes it all even better, because I'm like, wow, these are like pretty good for being that unprepared. But what happens is, bye, Ozzy.
Thank you so much, Ozzy. That was brilliant, man.
If you have to go, I'm going to be closing this in literally 30 seconds. But yeah, so debate roulette is basically you come on, we spin a wheel, we give you the debate topic, and you want to like debate that topic. You come on in with somebody else, and you have like 15 minutes to debate it, and it's fun. It's just fun.
Yeah,
cool. This is a non sequitur show. Anybody can come in and do debate roulette. Yeah, thank you, Joaquin.
Thank you, guys. Have a great one.
Yeah,
have a great day.
Same.
And Bliss Turd, I saw you didn't have a mic that worked. Next time, like I said, I'm willing to take on anybody. I will be not entertaining trolls. I haven't removed any comment from my video except for people that I've been blocked for several years. They don't get to come back and leave comments. I will remove their comments. If you don't know who they are, it's okay. It doesn't matter. But if you're in the live feed or you're in here, you're not one of those people, so don't worry about it. But there are people I will block. I'm sorry. I have no time to waste with people that are of that low caliber. I just don't. And you shouldn't have to either. And just by disagreeing, you're not going to get blocked. Never. I look for people that disagree, but give me an argument for goddamn sake. Don't just say your logic's wrong or you're wrong about Matt. Okay, show me, because I'm not the only one obviously that's saying these things. Ozzy's not a dumb guy, and he's been saying this for the longest time. So, anyways, Jim, I'm gonna let you lead us out. What you got for us, buddy?
And just thank you guys, everybody, for coming and just listening to this. And I just ask that, whenever you are presenting your arguments, present them with integrity, present them with reasons. And whenever you tell somebody that they are wrong, every time that you tell somebody that they're wrong, you should always be prepared to follow that up with a because. And with that,
without straw manning. That's a great day. Without straw manning.
Yeah.
Don't straw manning. It's bad. Good night.